A man walked into Bruce Lee's school and sat down. He didn't bow. He didn't take off his shoes. He didn't approach the front desk. There was no front desk, not in the way that modern gyms have front desks, with a computer and a sign-in sheet and a person behind the counter who smiles and asks if you have an appointment. Bruce's school didn't work that way. Bruce's school in Los Angeles, the one on College Street, the one with the hardwood floor and the mirrors and the Wing Chun dummy standing against the far wall like a man with no head and 3 arms, Bruce's school had a door. You came through the door. You were either expected or you weren't. This man was not expected. Taky Kimura told my father about the man in the chair. My father told me. I'm telling you. 3 hands. 3 transfers. The story has passed through 3 sets of fingers and each set has left something on it, a thumbprint, a warmth, a slight distortion at the edges the way a photograph distorts when you make a copy of a copy of a copy. The center holds. The edges soften. What I'm giving you is the center. The man came through the door at approximately 7:15 in the evening. Approximately. Taky didn't check his watch. Taky said about 15 minutes into class, and class started at 7, so the math gives you 7:15, but math is not memory and memory is not a clock and the 15 minutes could have been 12 or could have been 18 and the difference doesn't matter because what matters is not when the man arrived but how. He arrived the way weather arrives. Not through the door, through the room. The door opened. The man came through. The door closed. And the room was different. Not because the man was loud. Not because the man announced himself. Not because the man did anything that a person watching from the street through the window would have registered as unusual. The man walked through the door, crossed 12 feet of hardwood floor, picked up a metal folding chair that was leaning against the wall, the kind of gray metal folding chair that every gym has, the kind that weighs 7 pounds and costs $12 and exists in the world as furniture the way a brick exists in the world as architecture, functional, anonymous, everywhere. The man picked up the chair, unfolded it, set it against the wall, and sat down. 12 seconds. Maybe 15. In those 12 seconds, the room changed. Taky was standing by the far wall. He had a kicking pad in his left hand, the rectangular pad, leather, the one that Bruce used for demonstrations of close-range power, the pad that Taky held at chest height while Bruce drove his fist into it from distances that shouldn't have been possible. 6 inches. 4 inches. 2. The distance shrinking with each repetition until the fist was almost touching the pad before it moved and the pad still jumped and Taky's arm still rocked and the sound was still the sound, the flat, structural crack that meant the force was real, not performed. Taky had the pad. Nobody was hitting it. Class had started. Bruce was on the floor with 8 students, moving between them, correcting, demonstrating, the teacher mode that Bruce occupied the way a key occupies a lock, precisely, completely, with no space left over. Bruce in teacher mode was not the same as Bruce in fighter mode or Bruce in conversation mode or Bruce in any of the other modes that Bruce moved between with the speed and ease of a man changing channels on a television. Teacher mode was specific. The voice was louder. The gestures were bigger. The body took up more space because the students needed the space filled. They needed Bruce to be large, to be visible, to be the center of the room the way a sun is the center of a system, and Bruce obliged because Bruce understood systems and Bruce understood centers and Bruce understood that a teacher who is not the center of the room is not a teacher, he is furniture. Bruce was the center. Until the man sat down. The shift was not dramatic. Taky described it to my father the way you describe a change in air pressure. You can't point to it, you can't photograph it, you can't hold it in your hand and show it to someone and say here. This is what changed. But your body knows. Your ears know. The small hairs on your forearms know. Something in the room shifted the way something in a room shifts when a window opens 2 floors up and the draft hasn't reached you yet, but the air is already different and your body is already responding to the difference before your mind has registered the cause. Bruce was mid-sentence. He was explaining. Taky couldn't remember exactly what, but it was a principle, not a technique. Bruce distinguished between principles and techniques the way a carpenter distinguishes between wood and furniture. The wood is the principle. The furniture is the technique. You can have 1,000 techniques, and if you don't understand the principle underneath, then you have 1,000 pieces of furniture and no wood. Bruce was teaching wood. Bruce was always teaching wood. Mid-sentence. Mid-word, maybe. Bruce stopped. Not the way a man stops when he's interrupted, the sharp, annoyed cessation, the head turning toward the source of the interruption, the body language of a man whose flow has been broken. Not like that. Bruce stopped the way a river stops when it meets a dam. The flow doesn't cease, it redirects. The energy that was going into the sentence, into the teaching, into the wood, that energy didn't disappear. It changed direction. It went from outward to inward. From the students to the door. From the room to the chair. Bruce looked at the man. Taky watched Bruce look at the man. The look lasted, Taky couldn't say. 2 seconds. 3. Long enough for Bruce's eyes to travel from the man's shoes to the man's hands to the man's face and back to the man's hands. Taky noticed that. Taky noticed that Bruce's eyes went to the hands twice. The face once. The hands twice. Because the face tells you who a man is and the hands tell you what a man does, and Bruce needed to know what the man did more than he needed to know who the man was. The hands were on the man's thighs. Palms down. Fingers spread slightly. Relaxed. Not the relaxation of a man who is comfortable, the relaxation of a man who has trained himself to appear comfortable in rooms where he is not welcome. The studied, practiced, intentional relaxation of a man whose body has been taught to lie. Bruce read the lie. Taky knew Bruce read the lie because Bruce's shoulders changed. Not much. Not visibly, not to the students, not to anyone in the room who wasn't Taky Kimura, who had been watching Bruce Lee's shoulders for nearly a decade and could read the information in a 1 millimeter rise the way a seismologist reads the information in a 1 millimeter tremor. Bruce's shoulders rose. 1 millimeter. Maybe 2. The trapezius engaged, not contracted, not bunched, just engaged, the muscle going from off to aware the way a light goes from off to dim. Not bright. Dim, the first stage of readiness. Bruce turned back to the students. Again, he said. 1 word. Flat. Not angry. Not worried. Flat, the way a lake is flat when the wind stops and the surface reveals nothing about the depth. The word was a surface. Underneath the surface, the depth was working. The students went back to their drill. Bruce watched them. Corrected a wrist angle. Adjusted a foot position. Moved between the students the way he always moved, fluid, efficient, each step covering exactly the distance required, no more, no less. Bruce didn't waste steps the way he didn't waste words, the way he didn't waste motion. Economy was the principle. Economy was the wood. But the wood was different now. Taky could feel it. From the far wall, holding the pad nobody was hitting, Taky could feel that Bruce was teaching at a different frequency. The same words. The same corrections. The same movements. But the frequency, the underlying vibration, the thing beneath the thing, the engine note beneath the exhaust note, the frequency had changed. Bruce was teaching at the frequency of a man who knows he is being watched by someone who was not a student. The man in the chair did not move. He sat. Palms on thighs. Back straight, not military straight, not rigid, but the straightness of a man whose posture is a decision. Not an accident. His back was straight because someone had told him, years ago, that a straight back communicates authority, and the communication had become habit, and the habit had become posture, and the posture had become the man. He was his posture. He was the chair. He was the stillness. 20 minutes passed. Taky counted. Not by the clock, there was a clock on the wall, a round white institutional clock, the kind with the thin red second hand that sweeps and sweeps and sweeps, and Taky glanced at it, and the time was 7:30 something, which meant the man had been sitting for about 15 minutes, and Taky noted that, and then Taky stopped looking at the clock because looking at the clock was looking away from Bruce, and looking away from Bruce was something Taky did not do when the room was wrong. The room was wrong. Not dangerous. Taky was clear about this, my father was clear that Taky was clear. The room was not dangerous. The man in the chair was not generating danger the way some men generate danger, the coiled, pressurized, about to move energy that experienced fighters recognize the way experienced sailors recognize the color of the sky before a storm. The man was not a storm. The man was pressure. Steady, even, continuous pressure. The pressure of a presence that does not explain itself. The pressure of a man who sits in a chair in a room where he was not invited and does not leave and does not speak and does not move and does not explain, and the not explaining is the pressure. Bruce taught. For 20 minutes, Bruce taught. The students trained. The pads cracked. The feet shuffled on hardwood. The sounds of a class, the rhythm, the repetition, the call and response of instruction and execution, the sounds continued. Normal. Routine. The sounds of a Tuesday evening in a martial arts school in Los Angeles in the early 1970s. But the room was wrong. And Bruce knew. And the man in the chair knew that Bruce knew. And Taky, standing by the far wall with the pad in his hand, watching Bruce's shoulders and the man's hands and the space between them, the 12 feet of hardwood that separated the teacher from the chair, the center from the wall, the sun from the thing that had entered its system, Taky knew that both men knew. And nobody said a word. My father heard this in his kitchen. The kitchen was the room where Taky placed things. Not things, not physical objects, not tools or parts or the kind of inventory that my father kept in the workshop on shelves that were labeled with masking tape and pencil and handwriting so small you had to lean in to read it. Taky placed stories. Taky carried them across the Pacific or across the state, or across the city, or across whatever distance separated Taky's life from my father's kitchen, and Taky placed them on the table, between the teacup and the coffee cup, between the steam and the silence, between two men who understood that some things need a surface to rest on and a kitchen table is a surface and a surface is enough. The kitchen smelled like instant coffee. It always smelled like instant coffee because my father drank instant coffee the way other men drank water, constantly, reflexively, without pleasure or displeasure, as a fact of being alive. The coffee was Folgers. The cup was ceramic, white, with a chip on the rim at the 2 o'clock position. I remember the chip because I remember watching my father drink from the cup and rotate it so the chip was away from his lips and the rotation was automatic, unconscious, the body remembering what the mind had forgotten to notice. The spoon was bent. Not broken, bent. The handle curved slightly to the left, the result of some long ago incident that my father never explained because my father did not explain bent spoons. Bent spoons were facts. Facts didn't need explanations. Taky sat across from my father. Taky drank tea. Green tea. Not the ceremonial kind, not the powder, not the whisk, not the ritual. The kind that comes in a box and the box has a string and you lower the bag into the water and the water changes color and that's it. Taky's tea was functional. Taky's tea was the same as my father's coffee, a reason to sit. A reason to hold something warm, a reason to have hands on a cup instead of hands in a lap. The cup gave the hands a job. The job freed the mouth. Taky told my father about the man in the chair across many visits. Not one visit. Not a single evening. Taky rationed the story the way you ration water in a place where water is scarce, not because there isn't enough, but because the having of it needs to last, because the telling is a kind of living and the living shouldn't be rushed. The first visit, Taky described the chair. Not the man. The chair. The gray metal folding chair. The weight of it. The sound it made when the man unfolded it, the specific, mechanical, two-part sound of a folding chair opening, the legs swinging down, a metallic whisper, and the seat locking into place, a click, a commitment. Taky described the sound because Taky understood that the sound was the first thing Bruce heard. Before Bruce saw the man's face. Before Bruce read the man's hands. Before Bruce's shoulders rose 1 millimeter. Bruce heard the chair. The chair was the announcement. My father listened. My father held the cup with the chip at 2 o'clock and rotated the cup and drank and listened. My father did not ask who the man was. My father did not ask why the man sat down. My father did not ask any of the questions that a normal person would ask because my father was not a normal listener. My father was a specific listener. My father listened the way he worked metal, with patience, with tolerance, with the understanding that the thing being made will reveal itself in the making and the maker's job is not to ask what it will be but to hold the file steady and let the shape emerge. The shape was emerging. Taky described the chair because the chair was the first layer. Underneath the chair was the man. Underneath the man was the reason. Underneath the reason was Bruce. And underneath Bruce, at the bottom, always at the bottom, was the thing that Taky had seen and carried and was now, in my father's kitchen, beginning to set down. The second visit, Taky described the man. Not by name. By body. By the way the man held himself in the chair, the straightness, the hands, the palms down, the intentional relaxation. By the clothes. The suit dark, cut well, not American. The fabric had a sheen that Taky noticed from across the room, from the far wall, from behind the kicking pad. The sheen meant the suit was silk or silk blend, and a silk blend suit in a martial arts gym in Los Angeles in the early 1970s meant money, and money in that particular context, in a room full of men in cotton training clothes and bare feet, money was a statement. The suit was a statement. The chair was a statement. The stillness was a statement. Everything the man did was a statement, and the statement was, I am here, and my being here is enough, and you will respond to my being here, and I will not help you respond. The man was Japanese. Taky said this the way you say the sky is blue, not as information but as context. The man was Japanese. This mattered because Bruce's school was not a place where Japanese men in silk suits typically sat in folding chairs. Bruce's school was, Taky described it to my father, and my father described it to me. Bruce's school was a room that attracted a specific type of person. Fighters. Actors. Stuntmen. The occasional producer or director who had heard about Bruce through the film industry grapevine and wanted to see what the fuss was about. Martial artists from other schools who came to test or to learn or to watch, and Bruce welcomed all three because Bruce believed that testing and learning and watching were the same thing done at different speeds. The man in the chair was not a fighter, not an actor, not a stuntman, not a producer, not a martial artist from another school. The man in the chair was Taky. Paused here, my father said. Taky paused the way Bruce paused when he was about to say something that required the air in the room to be still. The pause was preparation. The pause was the chair unfolding before the body sits. The man was connected, Taky said. Connected. My father heard the word and did not ask connected to what. My father heard the word the way he heard all of Taky's words, as a piece of metal that needed filing, that would reveal its shape in time, that did not need to be identified before it was ready to be identified. My father filed the word. Set it on the workbench of his mind. Moved on. The third visit, Taky described what he saw first. Not the man. Not the chair. Not the suit or the hands or the sheen of the fabric. What Taky saw first, the first thing that Taky noticed, the first thing that registered in Taky's body before it registered in Taky's mind, was Bruce. Bruce's breathing. Taky said his breathing changed. Not faster. Not slower. Deeper. The breath that had been automatic, the shallow, unconscious respiration of a man teaching a class, moving between students, expending energy at a rate so far below his capacity that his body didn't bother to optimize for it, that breath changed. It went deeper. Into the belly. Into the diaphragm. Into the place where Bruce stored his power source, the engine room, the place where the real Bruce lived when the surface Bruce was doing something else. The surface Bruce was teaching. The deep Bruce was breathing. And the breathing was a signal. The breathing was the first signal that Taky received, and the signal said, Bruce has seen the man, and Bruce has read the man, and Bruce's body is responding to the reading. And the response is not fear and is not anger and is not any of the emotions that have names and can be categorized and filed in the cabinet of human feeling. The response is readiness. The response is the body saying to the mind, I don't know what this is, but I am preparing for it to be something. Taky saw the breathing before he saw the shoulders. The breathing came first. The shoulders came second. The eyes, Bruce's eyes going to the man's hands twice, the face once, came third. And the word, the single flat word, again came fourth. 4 signals. 4 layers. Breathing, shoulders, eyes, voice. Taky read them in order, the way you read a sentence in order, subject, verb, object, and the sentence that Bruce's body was writing in the air of the gym on a Tuesday evening in Los Angeles in the early 1970s was, something is in my room that shouldn't be. Not someone. Something. Taky was specific. My father was specific that Taky was specific. Bruce's body did not respond to the man as a person. Bruce's body responded to the man as a condition. A weather condition. A pressure condition. A change in the room's atmosphere that was caused by the man but was not the man, the way a storm is caused by the temperature but is not the temperature. Bruce responded to the pressure. And the response, the 4-layered, sequential, reading to readiness response, happened in less than 5 seconds. The chair opened. The man sat. 5 seconds passed. And Bruce's body had already written and sent and delivered the sentence, and Taky, standing by the far wall, holding the pad nobody was hitting, had already read it. 5 seconds. Taky told my father this over 3 visits. 3 evenings. 3 cups of tea and 3 cups of coffee and 3 silences and 3 slow, careful, layer by layer constructions of a scene that lasted 5 seconds and took 3 evenings to tell because the 5 seconds contained more information than most evenings contain, and the information needed time to be placed. In my father's kitchen was the surface where the placing happened. My father held the pieces. My father did not rush. My father filed. Bruce stepped back and turned to the wall. The students along the wall were no longer stretching. No longer talking. No longer doing the half-practicing of people waiting for the session to begin. They were watching. All of them. The room had reorganized itself around the woman in the center, the way a room reorganizes when something unexpected happens, the way the furniture of attention rearranges itself, chairs turning, bodies angling, eyes converging on the point where the unexpected thing is happening. Bruce looked at the wall of students and said a name. Dan. Dan Inosanto stood up. I need to tell you about Dan Inosanto because Dan Inosanto is not a prop in this story. Dan Inosanto was a human being with a life and a history and a body of work that extends decades beyond this single moment on a wooden floor in Los Angeles, and I will not reduce him to the man who got thrown by a woman he'd never met. That is what happened in the room. That is not who he is. Dan Inosanto was Filipino-American. 5'6". Maybe 145 pounds, maybe less, a compact body, dense with muscle, the body of a person who has been training in martial arts since childhood. Born in Stockton, California, in 1936. Grew up in a family where the Filipino martial arts eskrima, kali, the stick and blade traditions of the Philippines, were part of the fabric of daily life, the way language is part of daily life, the way food is part of daily life. Dan didn't come to martial arts from the outside. He was born inside it. By 1971, Dan Inosanto had been training with Bruce Lee for years. He was Bruce's most trusted training partner. The person Bruce tested techniques against. The person Bruce worked with when Bruce needed a body that could keep up, that could respond, that could absorb the speed and precision of Bruce's innovations and give back useful resistance. Dan was not Bruce's student in the way the other students were Bruce's students. Dan was Bruce's collaborator. Bruce's mirror. The person in the room whose body spoke the same language as Bruce's body. Dan was also, and this matters for the story, Dan was also a teacher in his own right. A man who would go on to become one of the most important martial arts instructors of the 20th century. A man who carried forward the art that Bruce was building. A man whose schools and students and influence would spread across the world in the decades after Bruce's death. Dan Inosanto was alive as I'm recording this. He is in his late 80s. He still teaches. He still moves. He is a living thread connecting the present to the room I'm describing. And I want to be absolutely clear about something. Dan Inosanto did not lose to the woman in the chair. Dan Inosanto was not defeated. Dan Inosanto was told by Bruce Lee to stand in the center of a room and let a woman he'd never met attempt a hip throw on him, and Dan, because Dan trusted Bruce, because Dan understood what Bruce was doing, because Dan was the kind of person who could read a room as well as Bruce could read a room, Dan stood in the center and made himself available for the throw. This is not the same thing as losing. This is the same thing as teaching. Dan was the instrument. Bruce was the teacher. The woman was the student. And the man in the chair was the audience that none of them were performing for. Dan walked to the center of the room. He stood in front of the woman. He was smaller than her, or maybe the same height, maybe slightly taller, it doesn't matter. What matters is that he was compact and trained and radiating the kind of physical ease that comes from years of practice, the ease of a body that knows where it is in space at all times, the ease that looks like relaxation but is actually the deepest form of readiness. Bruce stood between them. Not physically between them, off to the side, a step back, the position of a teacher who has set up the exercise and is now creating the space for the exercise to happen. Bruce looked at the woman. Bruce looked at Dan. Bruce looked at the woman again. Then Bruce said something to Dan. Jesse told my father what Bruce said, and my father told me, and the words are, "Let her work. Let her work. Not let her win. Not go easy on her. Not pretend to lose. Let her work." 3 words that contain an entire philosophy that the technique, if performed correctly, works regardless of who performs it. That the throw is not about the thrower. The throw is about the mechanics. The foot position. The grip. The rotation. If these 3 things are correct, the throw works. If the body commits fully, without hesitation, without the divided attention of a person who is thinking instead of doing, the throw works. Let her work means, the technique will do the job. Your job is to receive it honestly. Dan nodded. The woman stood in front of Dan Inosanto, and I want you to see her hands. I've been wanting to tell you about her hands since the beginning of this story, and now is the time. When she walked in, her hands were at her sides and they didn't know what to do. The hands of a person entering an unfamiliar space, empty, uncertain, hovering in the no man's land between action and inaction. Hands that wanted to do something but didn't know what. Hands that had been wanting for months, wanting to grip, wanting to strike, wanting to learn the shapes that a body makes when it is trained to move, and had been told that the wanting was wrong. Now her hands knew what to do. Not because she had mastered the technique. Not because 60 seconds of instruction had turned her into a martial artist. Her hands knew what to do because Bruce had given them a job. A specific job. A grip, this hand here, that hand there, the fingers wrapping the fabric of Dan's training shirt at these 2 specific points. The hands had a purpose now. The hands had been given a task. And a hand with a task is a different thing than a hand without one. A hand with a task is alive. A hand with a task is certain. A hand with a task belongs in the room. She gripped Dan's shirt. Her hands did the thing they'd been shown to do. And in the gripping, in the contact, her hands on his shirt, her fingers on the fabric, the physical connection between her body and his, something happened that I don't have a word for. Something shifted. Something in the room's gravity changed. Because the woman, the wife, the person who'd been brought here to fail, the woman was now touching the training partner of Bruce Lee with trained hands, with hands that had been given a shape and a purpose, and the touching was not tentative. The touching was the first honest thing that had happened in this room since the man sat down in the chair. The man in the chair was watching. I want you to remember the man in the chair because the story is about to leave him for a while. The story is about to go into the throw and the 10 minutes and the mat and the sound, and while the story is in those places, the man will still be in the chair. Watching. Arms crossed. But the arms, I think the arms were loosening. Not uncrossed. Loosening. The way a knot loosens when you pull the wrong end, not undone, but less tight. Less certain. The certainty starting to leak out through the edges the way the paint had leaked off the steel of the chair. The first attempt failed. I need to tell you that the first attempt failed because the story doesn't work without the failure. The story, the real story, the one Bruce told Jesse, the one Jesse told my father, the story includes the failure. Multiple failures. The woman did not grip Dan Inosanto's shirt and rotate her hips and send him flying through the air on the first try. That's the movie version. The movie version cuts from the instruction to the success and the audience cheers and the music swells and the man in the chair gasps and the credits roll. The real version has the failure. The woman gripped Dan's shirt. She set her feet the way Bruce had shown her. She began the rotation, the hips turning, the center of gravity dropping, and the rotation stalled. Her hips moved, but her feet didn't commit. Her weight stayed back. She pulled with her arms instead of turning with her body. The technique collapsed into a tug, a yank, a muscular effort that had nothing to do with the mechanics Bruce had shown her. Dan didn't move. Dan stood where he was. The tug moved his shirt but didn't move his body. He looked at Bruce. Bruce walked to the woman. "Your feet," Bruce said. "You moved your hands. Move your feet. Move your feet. Not your hands. Your feet." The woman reset. Gripped Dan's shirt again. Set her feet. Began the rotation. This time the feet moved, but too late. The rotation started in the hips, traveled to the arms, and the feet followed instead of leading. The sequence was wrong. The body was doing the right things in the wrong order, the way a person speaking a new language puts the words in the sentence but in the wrong arrangement, the meaning intact but the grammar broken. Dan shifted. Not a throw. A stumble. Half a step to the side. Progress. The woman's body had created enough force to displace Dan's balance, even if the displacement was wrong and incomplete and nothing like the clean throw that the technique was designed to produce. The woman let go. Stepped back. Looked at Bruce. Bruce said nothing. He walked to the woman and stood beside her and put his hand on her hip. Not her arm. Not her shoulder. Her hip. The fulcrum. The point around which the entire technique rotates. Bruce put his hand on the woman's hip and said, "Here. This is where it starts. Everything starts here." And he rotated her hip with his hand. Slowly. Showing her body, not telling her mind, showing her body the path that the hip takes during the throw. The arc. The speed. The way the hip leads and the rest of the body follows, the way the first domino falls and the rest of the dominoes have no choice. The woman felt it. I can't verify this, I can't verify a feeling through 4 links of chain. But Jesse told my father that Bruce said the woman felt it. That there was a moment, a specific, physical moment, when the woman's body understood the throw. Not her mind. Her body. The muscles and the bones and the connective tissue and the proprioceptive sense all aligned and the body said yes, this, I understand this, the way a body understands how to balance on a bicycle, the way understanding arrives not through thinking but through doing, through the doing teaching the thinking. Bruce stepped back. The woman gripped Dan's shirt. Third attempt. Her feet moved first this time. Not perfectly, the stance was too wide, the step was too large, the foot landed half an inch outside the optimal position. But the feet moved first. The hips followed. The rotation began in the correct place, not in the arms, not in the shoulders, in the hips, in the fulcrum, in the place where Bruce had put his hand and said here. Dan felt it. I know Dan felt it because of what happened next. Dan's weight shifted, Dan's balance broke, and the shift and the break were not Dan pretending. Were not Dan going easy. Were not Dan letting the woman think she was doing something she wasn't doing. Dan's weight shifted because the woman's technique, imperfect, rough, the technique of a person who had learned it 3 minutes ago, the woman's technique was mechanically correct enough to disrupt the physics of Dan's stance. The throw didn't land. Dan caught himself. Recovered. Stepped back, reset his feet, stood in front of the woman again. But the break was real. The moment of imbalance was real. The woman's body had created a real physical event, not a simulation, not a courtesy, not a training partner being polite. A real displacement of a real body that really trains and really knows how to stand. The room felt it. The students along the wall, the 6 or 7 men in dark training clothes who had been watching since Bruce said come here, the students felt the moment when the practice became real. The moment when the woman's technique crossed the line from attempting to working. Not successfully. Not completely. But the line was crossed. The technique had entered the territory of function. It was no longer a person imitating a movement. It was a person executing a movement. Badly. Incompletely. But executing. Bruce nodded. One nod. Small. The nod of a teacher who has seen the thing he was looking for. Not the throw, the commitment. The willingness of the body to lead with the feet, to rotate from the hips, to trust the mechanics instead of the muscles. The nod wasn't approval of the result. The nod was recognition of the process. Again, Bruce said. Again. This is the word that fills the next 10 minutes. This is the word that the story is built on. Not come here. Not throw him. Again. Over and over. The woman gripping Dan's shirt. The feet. The hips. The rotation. The attempt. The failure. The partial success. The reset. The grip. The feet. The hips. Again. I'm going to tell you about those 10 minutes. Not all of them, I don't have all of them. The chain is 4 links long and 10 minutes of physical training is hundreds of individual moments. Hundreds of adjustments, hundreds of tiny failures and tiny corrections and tiny progressions, and the chain cannot carry all of them. The chain can carry the shape of the 10 minutes. The arc. The trajectory from the first failed attempt to the moment when Dan hit the mat. What I have is this: the woman attempted the throw many times. Jesse didn't give my father a number. My father didn't give me a number. The number is somewhere in the chain, lost between Bruce's memory and mine, and I'll leave it where it fell. Many times. Enough times that the students along the wall stopped watching with curiosity and started watching with something else, attention. The deep attention. The kind of attention that you give to something when you realize it's not a spectacle, it's a process. A becoming. A person in the act of learning something with their body, which is the most honest kind of learning there is because the body cannot fake it, the body cannot pretend to understand, the body either does the thing or doesn't do the thing and everyone in the room can see which one is happening. The woman's technique improved. Attempt by attempt. The feet got closer to the right position. The hips led more decisively. The rotation smoothed. The grip tightened, not with more force, with more accuracy, the hands finding the precise points on Dan's shirt where the connection was most effective, the way a musician's fingers find the precise positions on the strings not through thinking but through repetition, through the fingers learning the geography of the instrument. Bruce corrected her. Not constantly, sparingly. A word here. A hand on her hip there. Closer. Faster. Here. The corrections were minimal because Bruce was teaching a body, not a mind, and a body needs space to learn. A body needs the silence between instructions to process the previous instruction, to integrate it, to make it part of the movement rather than an interruption of the movement. Bruce gave the woman space. Bruce let the woman's body work. And Dan was doing something that I think is the most underappreciated part of this story. Dan was receiving. Dan was standing in the center of the room, attempt after attempt, and letting this woman, a stranger, an untrained person, a person whose hands 3 minutes ago didn't know what to do, Dan was letting this woman practice a throw on his body. He was giving her his balance. Not his weakness. His balance. The thing he had spent years developing, the stability, the rootedness, the ability to stand and absorb and redirect. Dan was offering this to the woman as the surface she could learn against. The way a wall offers itself to a ball. The ball needs the wall to learn what it can do. Dan was the wall. And the wall was honest. Dan didn't collapse. Dan didn't fake it. When the technique was wrong, Dan stood firm. When the technique was right or approaching right, Dan let his body respond honestly. The balance broke when it should have broken. The weight shifted when the physics demanded a shift. Dan was the truth of the room. Not Bruce. Bruce was the teacher. Dan was the truth. Dan's body was the test that couldn't be faked, the exam that couldn't be cheated, the mirror that reflected only what was actually happening. The man in the chair. I keep leaving him and coming back to him because the story keeps leaving him and coming back to him. He's the fixed point. The woman is moving, learning, changing, progressing. Bruce is moving, teaching, adjusting, observing. Dan is moving, receiving, responding, offering his balance. Everyone in the room is in motion. The students along the wall are in the motion of their attention, their heads turning, their bodies shifting, their understanding of what they're watching evolving from curiosity to something deeper. The man in the chair is not moving. Except that he is. The arms. The arms are telling the story that the man doesn't know he's telling. The first uncrossing and recrossing, that was the surprise, the reassertion. But now, 5 minutes in, 6 minutes in, 7 minutes in, now the arms have uncrossed and recrossed several times. Each recrossing a little less committed than the last. Each uncrossing lasting a little longer. The man's body is having an argument with the man's plan, and the man's body is winning. The body knows something is happening that the plan didn't account for. The body is registering the change in the room, the shift from spectacle to process, from the wife's expected failure to the wife's unexpected progression. The body is absorbing information that the crossed arms are trying to reject. I don't know what the man was thinking. I don't know what a man thinks when the thing he was certain about begins to dissolve in front of him. I don't know what it feels like to sit in a chair you chose and watch the verdict you decided crumble under the weight of evidence you didn't expect. I could guess. I could project. I could fill the man's mind with the thoughts that I would have in that chair, the thoughts that a person who was watching their certainty die might have. But I won't. The man's thoughts are not in the chain. Bruce didn't describe them. Jesse didn't speculate. My father didn't embellish. The man's thoughts are his, and I'll leave them where they belong, in the skull of a man in a chair in a room in Los Angeles in 1971, a room that is already gone, a chair that is already folded and stored, a skull that is already, probably, underground. What I can tell you is the body. The arms uncrossing and recrossing. The shift in the seat. The lean. At some point, the man leaned forward. Not a lot. An inch. 2 inches. The lean of a person who is involuntarily invested in what they're watching, the lean of a moviegoer who has forgotten they're in a theater, the lean that the body makes when the mind's defenses have dropped and the attention has become genuine and the pretense of detachment has cracked along the seam. The man leaned forward, and then caught himself, and leaned back, and crossed his arms again. But the lean happened. The crack was there. And cracks don't uncrack. I want to stop the clock. I want to pause the room in Los Angeles, the woman gripping Dan's shirt, Bruce standing off to the side, the students along the wall, the man in the chair with his cracking arms. I want to freeze all of it and step outside and talk about something that the story contains but doesn't say. The weight of empty hands. When I was growing up, my father did not talk about his emotions. This is not unusual for men of his generation, the generation that learned to be men from men who learned to be men from men who learned to be men, the chain of masculinity extending backward through time like a line of folding chairs, each one occupied by a man with crossed arms watching the next man learn to cross his arms. My father did not talk about his emotions. My father talked about engines and wood grain and the weather and the sonics and the specific qualities of different grades of sandpaper. But my father talked about Jesse's stories. And when my father talked about Jesse's stories, something happened to his voice that didn't happen when he talked about engines or sandpaper. The voice softened. Not weakened, softened. The way wood softens when you sand it, not less strong, less rough. The surface becoming something a hand can rest on without catching. And I think now, looking back, with the distance of years and the perspective of a person who has spent months living inside these stories, I think the stories were the way my father talked about his emotions. Not about the story's emotions. About his. The stories were the vehicle. The martial arts, the dojos, the techniques, the throws, these were the containers into which my father could pour the things he felt but did not have the vocabulary to express directly. When my father told me about the woman's hands, the hands that didn't know what to do, the hands that Bruce gave a task, when my father described those hands, his own hands were in front of him, open, palms up, in the gesture of a person showing you something that isn't there. And I understood, not then, but later, much later, that my father was talking about his own hands. About the experience of having hands that don't know what they're for. About the experience of being in a room where you feel you don't belong. Not because the room won't have you, but because no one has shown you what your hands should do. My father's hands found their purpose in tools. In wrenches and sanders and the steering wheel of his truck and the handshake that he gave every person he met, firm, brief, a handshake that said I am here, I am solid, my hands have a job and the job is to meet your hand. My father's hands found their task the way the woman's hands found their task, someone showed them. Someone put a wrench in my father's hand the way Bruce put a grip on the woman's hand. And the hand said yes, this, I know what to do now. The hand was alive. I think about the man in the chair. The man whose hands were locked across his chest. And I think, those hands have no task. Those hands have been given the job of preventing, of holding, of keeping the arms crossed and the verdict locked and the certainty maintained. Those hands are busy, but they're not working. They're guarding. And a hand that guards is not the same as a hand that grips. A hand that guards is closed against the world. A hand that grips is open to it. The woman's hands were open. The man's hands were closed. This is the whole story in 2 images. I want to carry this further, but the room in Los Angeles is waiting. The woman is still gripping Dan's shirt. The clock is still paused. The throw hasn't happened yet, and the throw is coming, and I need to be there when it happens because the throw is the center of the story, the way the hip is the center of the technique. Everything radiates from it, everything connects to it, everything before is the setup and everything after is the consequence. Let's go back. The clock restarts. The woman has been attempting the throw for I don't know exactly. 7 minutes. 8. Somewhere in the middle of 10. Her shirt is damp sweat, the sweat of effort, the sweat of a body working harder than it's worked in a long time, maybe harder than it's ever worked. Her breathing is audible. Not gasping, audible. The kind of breathing that fills a room when a person is doing something that requires their whole body, the breathing that says, I am using everything I have. Her technique has changed. Not transformed, changed. The way a river changes as it moves downstream. It's still the same river, still the same water, but the shape is different. The banks are different. The speed is different. The woman's technique at minute 8 is not the technique Bruce showed her at minute 0. It's the same technique, the same foot position, the same grip, the same rotation, but it has been shaped by 8 minutes of repetition. The rough edges have been worn down. The gaps between the steps have narrowed. The foot moves, the hip follows, the rotation begins, and the gap between each step, the hesitation, the thinking, the moment where the mind interrupts the body to check the instructions, the gap is closing. Dan feels the change. Dan has been standing in the center of this room for 8 minutes, receiving this woman's attempts, and Dan can feel in his body what the room can see with its eyes. The technique is approaching something. Not mastery. Not even competence. Something more fundamental. The technique is approaching functionality. The point where the mechanics work. The point where the physics of the throw, the lever, the fulcrum, the rotation align correctly and the throw becomes not a hope but an inevitability. Dan has felt this before. Dan has trained with hundreds of students, maybe thousands, in his life. Dan knows the feeling of a technique that is about to work, the way the grip tightens, the way the feet find the floor, the way the body stops performing the movement and starts being the movement. Dan can feel it in the woman's hands. The grip is different now than it was 8 minutes ago. The grip is alive. Bruce is standing off to the side. Hands behind his back. He has not spoken in several minutes. The correction stopped somewhere around minute 5 or 6, not because the technique was perfect, because the corrections were no longer necessary. The woman's body had taken over. The woman's body was teaching itself, using Dan's body as the textbook. Using the repetition as the language, using the failures as the lessons. Bruce was no longer needed. Bruce had given the woman enough. The rest was between her body and Dan's body and the wooden floor. The students along the wall are silent. Completely silent. I don't mean quiet, I mean silent. The kind of silence that fills a room when every person in the room has stopped generating sound because every person in the room is watching something that demands complete attention. The silence of an audience at the moment before the resolution. The silence of held breath. And in this silence, in the silence of the room, in the breathing of the woman, in the almost imperceptible creak of the wooden floor under feet that are finding their position for the final time, in this silence, the woman grips Dan's shirt. The grip is right. Both hands. The fingers in the correct position, the position Bruce showed her, the position she's been finding and losing and finding again for 10 minutes. The grip is right. The feet are right. Not perfect, the left foot is half an inch too far forward, or half an inch too far back, and in a test, in an examination, in a formal evaluation by a panel of martial arts judges, the foot would lose points. But the foot is functional. The foot is close enough. The foot is in the territory where the physics will work. The hips begin. The rotation is fast. Faster than any of the previous attempts. The woman's body has learned through the 8 or 9 or 10 minutes of repetition, through the dozens of attempts, through the failures and the partial successes and the resets. The woman's body has learned that the rotation must be fast, not forceful. Fast. The speed is the technique. The speed is what converts the foot position and the hand grip into the force that breaks the other person's balance. And the woman's body, in this final attempt, commits to speed in a way it hasn't committed before. The hips turn. The arms follow. The body drops, the center of gravity lowering, the fulcrum engaging, the lever extending. Dan's body receives the force, and this time, unlike every previous time, this time the force is sufficient. This time the mechanics are correct enough that the physics takes over, and the physics doesn't care about the woman's gender or her lack of training or the man in the chair or the months of asking or the marriage or the plan. The physics cares about the angle and the rotation and the force and the fulcrum. Dan's feet leave the floor. I want to slow this down. I want to take the half second between Dan's feet leaving the floor and Dan's body hitting the mat and stretch it out and walk around inside it, because this half second is the room changing. Not the story. The room. The physical space. The air inside the room. The relationship between every person in the room and every other person in the room. This half second rewrites everything. Dan is in the air. Not high. A hip throw doesn't launch a person into the sky. Dan is in the air the way a person is in the air when they trip close to the ground, horizontal, the body traveling sideways and down, the trajectory inevitable, the landing assured. Dan is in the air and Dan's body knows it's in the air, and Dan's body is doing what a trained body does when it's being thrown, preparing to receive the ground. Relaxing. Not fighting the fall. Accepting the physics and letting the body become soft enough to absorb the impact without injury. Dan is a master at this. Dan has been thrown thousands of times by Bruce Lee and by other training partners and by students who were learning to throw. Dan's body knows how to fall the way a bird's body knows how to land. The fall is part of Dan's vocabulary. Dan is not in danger. Dan is in the air and he is as safe as a person can be while moving through space toward a wooden floor at a speed that the woman's body has generated. But the room doesn't know this. The room, the students along the wall, the room doesn't see Dan's training. The room sees a woman throwing Bruce Lee's toughest student. The room sees something that the room has never seen before, and the room's response is silence. The silence deepening. The silence becoming physical, a pressure in the room, a density in the air, the kind of silence that you can feel on your skin like humidity. And the man in the chair, the man whose arms have been crossing and uncrossing for 10 minutes, the man whose lean forward was caught and corrected, the man whose certainty has been cracking along seams he didn't know existed, the man sees his wife throwing a man onto a mat and the man's arms uncross for the final time. Dan hits the mat. The sound. I don't know the sound. I wasn't there. Jesse wasn't there. The sound has been lost in the chain, the specific quality of it, the frequency, the reverb in the room with its wooden floor and its mirrored wall and its high windows. I don't have the sound. What I have is the silence that follows the sound. The silence that falls on the room like a second impact. Dan hits the mat and the sound fills the room, and then the silence fills the room, and the silence is heavier than the sound. The woman is standing. Her hands are still gripping Dan's shirt, one hand still holding the fabric at the shoulder, the other hand still holding the fabric at the hip. Her feet are in the position Bruce showed her. Her hips have completed the rotation. She is standing and Dan is on the mat and her hands are full of the shirt of Bruce Lee's best student, and she is looking down at what she has done. Her face. Jesse told my father, Bruce told Jesse, the woman's face was not what you'd expect. Not triumph. Not pride. Not the exultation of a person who has proven something to someone. The woman's face was surprise. Genuine surprise. The surprise of a person whose body has done something that the person's mind didn't fully believe was possible. The woman surprised herself. The throw surprised her. The fact that she could do it, that her body, her untrained body, the body that had been told for months that it was not built for this, the fact that this body could generate enough force and enough precision to put a trained martial artist on a mat, this fact surprised her the way a sudden light surprises a person in a dark room. Not fear. Not joy. Surprise. The raw, wordless surprise of a person meeting their own capability for the first time. Her own body had surprised her. I said that in the beginning. I said it before the story started, before the chain was explained, before the chair and the man and the technique and the 10 minutes. Her own body had surprised her. And now we're here. We're in the moment. We're in the surprise. Bruce changed the class. Not the drill. Not the technique. Not the thing the students were doing with their hands and feet and hips. Bruce changed the geometry. The way the bodies moved through the room. The pattern, the traffic pattern, the flow of 8 men training in pairs on a hardwood floor. Bruce rerouted the pattern. Before the man sat down, the students were spread across the room. 2 pairs near the mirrors. 1 pair by the heavy bag. 1 pair in the center, under the overhead fluorescent that buzzed at a frequency that only Taky noticed because Taky noticed frequencies the way dogs notice pitches, not consciously, not by decision, but by the hardware he was born with, the hardware that allowed him to stand in a room and feel the room the way a blind man feels a wall before he touches it. After the man sat down, Bruce moved the students. Not with words. With his body. Bruce drifted, that was Taky's word, drifted, and the word was precise because Bruce didn't walk or step or stride or cross or any of the verbs that describe a man going from one place to another by deciding to go. Bruce drifted. He was correcting a wrist angle near the mirrors. He drifted toward the center pair. Corrected a foot position. Drifted toward the pair by the heavy bag. And as he drifted, the students drifted with him, not because Bruce told them to, but because Bruce was the center and the center was moving and the system moved with its center the way water moves with its current. Within 10 minutes, all 4 pairs were on the right side of the room. The side away from the man. Taky noticed. Taky noticed because the floor told him. The left side of the room, the man's side, the chair's side, the wall side, was empty. 12 feet of bare hardwood between the nearest student and the man in the folding chair. The 12 feet wasn't an accident. The 12 feet was Bruce. Bruce had created a buffer. Not for safety. Taky was clear about that. The buffer was not a defensive measure, not a barricade, not the kind of distance a man creates between himself and a threat when the threat is physical. The man in the chair was not physically threatening. The man was sitting. The man had not moved. The man's hands were on his thighs, palms down, fingers slightly spread, the same position he had assumed when he sat and the same position he would hold for the next, but I'm getting ahead of the story. The story is the buffer. The buffer was for the students. Bruce moved the students away from the man because the students didn't know what the man was and Bruce did. Bruce knew what the man was the way Bruce knew what a stance was, by reading the body, by measuring the distance between intention and position, by calculating the equation that lived in the space between what a man's body said and what a man's body did. Bruce read the man in 5 seconds and the reading told Bruce that the students should not be near the man. Not because the man would do something. Because the man's presence would do something. The pressure. The wrongness. The weather. The students would feel it, not the way Taky felt it, not the way Bruce felt it, but in the blurred, unfocused way that untrained people feel things they cannot name. They would feel the room was wrong and they wouldn't know why, and the not knowing would make them tight and the tightness would ruin the training, and Bruce did not allow ruined training. So Bruce moved them. Quietly. Without announcement. Without explanation. The way weather moves clouds, not by pushing, not by force, but by changing the conditions so that the clouds go where the conditions tell them to go. Bruce changed the conditions. The students went. And then Bruce did something that Taky had never seen. Bruce moved himself to the center of the room. Not the teaching center, the geometric center. The exact middle of the hardwood floor, equidistant from all four walls, equidistant from the students and the man, equidistant from everything. Bruce stood in the center and he didn't teach. He demonstrated. He demonstrated a form. Not a specific form, not Wing Chun, not Jeet Kune Do, not any of the named systems that Bruce studied and absorbed and disassembled and rebuilt. A form that was Bruce's. A form that Taky had seen pieces of, a hand movement here, a weight shift there, a turn of the hip that was so small and so fast that it looked like stillness until you understood that the stillness was moving and the moving was still and the contradiction was the point. Bruce demonstrated the form facing the students. His back was to the man. His back was to the man in the chair, and Taky standing by the far wall, equidistant from both, holding the pad, feeling the frequency of the room hum at a pitch he didn't like. Taky saw Bruce's back, and Bruce's back was a message. Not a message to the man. A message to Taky. The message was, I know where he is. Bruce's back was to the man and Bruce knew exactly where the man was. Taky knew that Bruce knew because Bruce's back told him. The way Bruce held his spine, the slight, almost invisible coil at the base, the readiness that lived in the lumbar, the engine idle that meant Bruce's body was running at minimal output but could redline in a fraction of a second. The spine said, he is 12 feet behind me. He has not moved. His hands are on his thighs. His weight is centered in the chair. He is not about to stand. Bruce's back was reading the man. Not eyes. Not ears. The back. The skin of the back. The nerve endings that lived in the skin and received information from the air temperature, vibration, pressure, the displacement caused by a body's presence in a space, and transmitted that information to the brain, and the brain processed it at the speed of Bruce Lee's brain, which was a speed that Taky had spent a decade learning to respect and had never learned to match. Bruce demonstrated the form with his back to the man, and his back never lied, and his back said, he is there. He is still. I am here. I am ready. The form was beautiful. Taky told my father that the form was beautiful. My father told me that Taky said the word beautiful, and the word surprised my father because Taky did not use the word beautiful. Taky used words like good and fast and clean and right. Taky measured things in terms of function. Did the thing work? Did the thing do what it was supposed to do? Did the thing achieve the result that the thing was designed to achieve? Beautiful was not in Taky's vocabulary for movement. Beautiful was a word for sunsets and paintings and the things that lived outside the gym. Inside the gym, the word was right. But Taky said beautiful. Because the form that Bruce demonstrated alone, in the center of the room, with 8 students watching from the right side and 1 man watching from the left side and Taky watching from the far wall, the form was not right. It was more than right. It was the thing that happens when right has been practiced so many times that right becomes transparent, and what shows through is not the technique but the person, not the wood but the tree, not the form but the man inside the form, and the man inside the form was Bruce, and Bruce was beautiful. The form lasted maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds. A minute and a half. The length of a pop song chorus. The length of a television commercial break. The length of nothing, in the context of an evening class that runs 2 hours. 90 seconds. But the 90 seconds did something to the room. The room, which had been wrong since the man sat down, wrong the way a room is wrong when the pressure changes and the air thickens and the frequency shifts to a pitch that the body recognizes even when the mind doesn't, the room changed again. The wrongness didn't disappear. The wrongness was still there. The man was still in the chair. The hands were still on the thighs. The back was still straight. The pressure was still pressure. But the wrongness had been, Taky used a word that my father translated for me, and the translation was imperfect because the word was Taky's and Taky's words did not translate easily, but the closest word was contained. Bruce contained the wrongness. In 90 seconds. With a form. With his back turned to the source of the wrongness. With his spine reading the room and his hands drawing shapes in the air and his feet finding positions on the hardwood that were so precise and so sure that the hardwood seemed to rise to meet them, the way the earth rises to meet a thing that belongs on it. Bruce contained the wrongness, and the wrongness stayed contained, and the class continued. But Bruce did not go back to teaching. Bruce stayed in the center. He called students to him, one pair at a time, then another, and he worked with each pair from the center, from the geometric middle of the room, the place where he could see both sides at once, the place where his back was to no one because the center has no back. The center is all front. The center is the place where a man can face every direction at once without turning. Bruce taught from the center for the rest of the class. For 90 more minutes, Bruce stood in the middle of his room and taught his students, and did not look at the man, and did not turn his back to the man, and did not acknowledge the man, and did not ignore the man. Bruce did the thing that is harder than acknowledging and harder than ignoring. Bruce included the man. In the geometry. In the system. The man in the chair became part of the room the way the mirrors were part of the room, and the heavy bag was part of the room, and the Wing Chun dummy was part of the room. The man was furniture. Not dismissed furniture, included furniture. Furniture that had a place and a function, and the function was to sit against the wall and be still, and the man was performing his function, and Bruce was performing his function, and the room was a system, and the system was running, and every piece was where it was supposed to be. The students didn't notice. Taky noticed. Taky noticed that the students didn't notice, and the not noticing was the proof that Bruce had succeeded. The geometry worked. The buffer held. The containment held. The center held. The students trained and sweated and hit pads and corrected wrist angles and adjusted foot positions and felt, if they felt anything at all, that this was a normal Tuesday evening class in which their teacher was slightly more focused than usual, slightly more present, slightly more in the room than he usually was, which was saying something because Bruce was always in the room. Bruce was always the most in-the-room person in any room. Tonight, Bruce was more. And the more was because of the man. Not despite the man. Because of. The man's presence, the pressure, the wrongness, the weather had pushed Bruce into a higher register of presence. The man had forced Bruce to be more of himself, more of the center, more of the system. The man had, by sitting in a chair and doing nothing, made Bruce Lee more Bruce Lee than Bruce Lee usually was. Taky told my father this, and my father was quiet for a long time. My father was quiet because my father recognized the principle. Not from martial arts, from engines. From the workshop. From the bench where my father filed metal to tolerance and measured parts with calipers and understood, in his hands, the thing that Bruce understood in his body, that pressure makes precision. That the tighter the tolerance, the better the engine runs. That a part that fits loosely in a chamber will work, will function, will do the job, but a part that fits precisely, the part that has been filed and measured and tested until the fit is exact, until there is no room for error and no room for error and no room for anything except the part in the chamber and the seal between them, a part that fits precisely will not just work. It will sing. Bruce sang that night. The man in the chair was the tolerance. The man's presence was the pressure that tightened the fit. And Bruce, the part, the engine, the precision instrument that had been filed and measured and tested for 20 years, Bruce responded to the pressure the way precision responds to tolerance. He got better. Not faster. Not stronger. Not louder. Better. More efficient. More present. More Bruce. The distance between what Bruce could do and what Bruce was doing, the gap that exists in every performer between capacity and output, between the engine's potential and the engine's current RPM, the distance shrank. The gap closed. Bruce moved closer to his own limit. Not because he chose to. Because the room required it. The man required it. And the man sat in his chair and watched Bruce require it, and the man's face, Taky said, from across the room, from the far wall, holding the pad, the man's face did not change. The man watched the form. The man watched the teaching. The man watched Bruce Lee become more Bruce Lee than Bruce Lee usually was, and the man's face was the same face it had been when he sat down, composed, still, unreadable. The face of a man who has seen many rooms and many men and many performances and has learned to receive them all with the same expression, which is no expression, which is the expression of stone, which is the expression that tells you nothing and therefore tells you everything. The man had seen this before. Not this, not Bruce, not this room, not this specific performance. But this kind of thing. This kind of man. This kind of pressure. The man had sat in chairs in other rooms and watched other men respond to his presence, and the response had been the same, the heightening, the tightening, the precision that pressure extracts from men who are capable of precision, and the man had learned to watch the heightening the way a jeweler watches a stone being cut. With appreciation. With knowledge. With the patience of a man who knows what he is looking at because he has spent his life looking at it. Bruce was being cut. By the man's presence. By the pressure. By the chair and the suit and the hands on the thighs and the stillness. Bruce was being cut, and the cutting was revealing facets, and the facets were catching light. And the light was the light of the room, fluorescent, buzzing, flat, the least beautiful light in the world, and the facets were turning the flat light into something else. Into the light that Taky called beautiful. 9 o'clock approached. The class was ending. The students were cooling down, the slow movements, the stretches, the rituals of conclusion that every martial arts class observes because the body needs rituals the way the mind needs stories, and the rituals say, this is ending, this is done, you may return to the world outside the gym where the rules are different and the pressure is less and the tolerance is wider. Bruce led the cool down from the center. The man sat in his chair. The clock ticked toward 9. The class ended. The students bowed. Not to Bruce. Bruce didn't require bowing, not in the formal sense, not in the rigid hierarchical sense of traditional martial arts where the bow is a transaction and the transaction is, I acknowledge your rank and you acknowledge my submission. Bruce's bow was different. Bruce's bow was mutual. Both men bow. Both men acknowledge. The bow says, we train together, and the together is the thing, and the thing has ended, and we mark the ending. The students bowed and Bruce bowed and the class was over. The students began to leave. One by one, in the way that people leave a room after an event, gathering things, putting on shoes, the low murmur of conversation, the social noise that fills the space between the end of the thing and the beginning of the next thing. Gym bags. Towels. Water bottles, not plastic, not in the early 1970s. Metal canteens. Thermoses. The containers of the era. The students gathered their containers and their shoes and they moved toward the door, and as they moved they passed the man in the chair, and as they passed the man in the chair they did what people do when they pass a thing they don't understand, they pretended it wasn't there. Not all of them. One student, Taky, didn't remember his name, or Taky remembered and didn't tell my father, or my father remembered and didn't tell me. The chain has gaps and the gaps are not failures. The gaps are the places where the chain decided that the link wasn't load-bearing and let it go. One student glanced at the man as he passed. A quick glance. The kind of glance that enters and exits in half a second and carries with it the maximum amount of information that half a second can carry, which is more than people think. Half a second is enough to register face, posture, expression, suit, hands, threat level. Half a second is enough to decide, not my problem. The student glanced and decided and left. The room emptied. 8 students became 7. 7 became 6. 6 became 4. 4 became 2. 2 became 1, and the 1 was the slow one, the one who always took the longest to pack up, the one who retied his shoes twice and folded his towel and checked his bag for his keys and did the things that slow people do when they are slow, not because they lack speed but because they lack the willingness to leave the place where they were the version of themselves they prefer. The slow student left. And the room was 3. Bruce. Taky. The man. Taky did not leave. Taky did not move toward the door. Taky did not gather a bag or put on shoes because Taky's bag was behind the counter and Taky's shoes were by the door, and Taky was not going to the door because Taky was not leaving because Taky was Taky, and Taky's job, the job he had given himself, the job nobody had assigned and nobody could fire him from and nobody could pay him for, Taky's job was to be in the room when the room was wrong. The room was still wrong. The fluorescent buzzed. The clock ticked. The air that had been moved by 8 bodies training for 2 hours was settling, the temperature dropping, the humidity dropping, the energy dropping, the room returning to its resting state the way a body returns to its resting heart rate after exertion. The room was cooling. The room was quieting. The room was becoming the room it was when nobody was in it, the empty room, the room that existed between classes, the room that held nothing but floor and mirrors and the dummy and the bag and the chairs folded against the wall. Except one chair. One chair was not folded against the wall. One chair was open. One chair held a man. The man had not moved. 2 hours. The man had been sitting in the chair for approximately 2 hours. Taky had watched him for approximately 2 hours. And in approximately 2 hours, the man had done the following things. He had crossed his legs once, at approximately the 40-minute mark, left ankle over right knee, and held that position for approximately 10 minutes, and then uncrossed. That was one movement. He had adjusted his jacket once, at approximately the hour and 15 mark, a small gesture, the right hand leaving the thigh and going to the lapel and pulling the fabric a 1/4 inch to the left and the hand returning to the thigh. That was one movement. He had blinked. Taky did not count the blinks. But Taky noticed that the man blinked at a rate that seemed normal, not staring, not performing, not the wide-eyed fixed gaze of a man who was trying to intimidate through eye contact. Normal blinking. The kind of blinking that a body does when the body is not thinking about blinking. 2 movements and normal blinking. In 2 hours. That was the man's physical output. Bruce's physical output in the same 2 hours, approximately 4,000 individual movements, counting steps, hand techniques, demonstrations, corrections, the form, the drifting, the geometry, the containment, the center, 4,000 movements, each one controlled, each one intentional, each one carrying information that was readable by Taky and by the man and by no one else in the room. 4,000 to 2. The ratio was absurd. The ratio was the story. One man generating 4,000 movements and one man generating 2, and the 2 men occupying the same room for the same duration, and the room holding both outputs simultaneously, the torrent and the stone, the river and the rock, the engine and the anchor, and neither man acknowledging the other and both men aware of the other, and the awareness was the thing. The awareness was the thread that connected the 4,000 to the 2, the thread that said, I see you and you see me and we are doing different things in the same room, and the room is holding both. The room held both. For 2 hours. And now the room was 3. Bruce stood in the center, where he had been for the last 90 minutes. He didn't move to the man. He didn't move to Taky. He stood in the center and he looked at the floor. Not at the man. Not at Taky. At the floor. The floor. The hardwood. The surface that held everything, the steps, the forms, the drills, the buffer, the geometry, the 2 hours, the floor that had absorbed the weight of all of it and was now bare and cooling and reflecting the fluorescent light in the dull, flat way that hardwood reflects fluorescent light when the hardwood is old and has been scuffed by 1,000 feet, and the scuffs have become the floor's memory, the record of everything that has happened on it. Bruce looked at the floor, and the looking was not idle. The looking was not rest. The looking was the thing that Bruce did when Bruce was deciding. Taky knew this. Taky had seen this look, the downward gaze, the chin slightly dropped, the eyes focused on a point approximately 4 feet in front of Bruce's toes, a point that contained nothing, a point that was empty, a point that existed only as a place for Bruce's eyes to rest while Bruce's mind worked. Taky had seen this look in gyms and in restaurants and in cars and in the spaces between the spaces, the pauses between the actions, the silences between the sentences. The look meant, Bruce is processing. The look meant, do not interrupt. Taky did not interrupt. The man in the chair did not interrupt. 3 men in a room. Fluorescent light. The buzz. The clock. The cooling air. The scuffed floor. The mirrors reflecting 3 men in a room. The heavy bag, still, the chain holding it to the ceiling making a sound so small that only Taky heard it, a metallic whisper, the sound of a chain link settling against the link above it, the sound of stillness finding its final position. Bruce raised his head. He looked at the man. Not the way he had looked at the man 2 hours earlier, not the rapid scan, shoes hands face hands, the 5-second reading that had produced the 4-signal response. This was different. This was a sustained look. This was Bruce Lee looking at a man the way Bruce Lee looked at anything he had decided to understand, completely, without hurry, without the social filters that make people look away after 2 seconds because 2 seconds is the maximum that politeness allows, and anything beyond 2 seconds is a stare, and a stare is a challenge, and a challenge is an invitation, and an invitation is a door. Bruce opened the door. He looked at the man for what Taky estimated was 10 seconds. 10 seconds is long. 10 seconds of sustained eye contact between 2 men who have not spoken and have not been introduced and have spent 2 hours in the same room without acknowledging each other. 10 seconds is a decade. 10 seconds is a book. 10 seconds contains enough information to fill an evening of conversation, and the information is not in words, the information is in the looking, in the quality of the looking, in the angle of the head and the width of the pupils and the rate of blinking and the muscle tension around the eyes and the mouth and the jaw and the 1,000 micro-expressions that a human face generates in 10 seconds, each one carrying data, each one transmitting. Bruce transmitted. The man received. Taky, from the far wall, received both transmissions simultaneously, Bruce's and the man's, and the simultaneous receiving was overwhelming. Taky told my father this. Taky said, I felt like I was standing between two radio towers. Not loud. Not painful. Overwhelming, the way being in a room with two sources of strong signal is overwhelming because the body can't process both signals at once and the signals are on different frequencies and the frequencies interfere with each other and the interference creates a third frequency, a ghost frequency, a frequency that neither source is generating but that exists because both sources are generating at the same time. The ghost frequency was the room. The room itself, the air, the floor, the mirrors, the fluorescent, the buzz, the chain in the room was vibrating at the ghost frequency, the frequency created by Bruce and the man looking at each other in silence for 10 seconds after 2 hours of not looking at each other. And then Bruce spoke. Not to the man. To Taky. Bruce turned his head, not his body, his head, the way a man turns his head when he wants to address someone without releasing the person he's looking at, the way a man keeps his shoulders squared to one direction while his face goes to another, the split, the division, the ability to be in two places at once that Bruce had and other men didn't. Bruce turned his head toward Taky and said, T. One word. The same flatness as again. The same surface. The same lake. But this word had something underneath it that again didn't have. Again had been a command to the students, continue, resume, pretend the room is normal. T was not a command. T was a decision. T meant, this man is staying. This man is not leaving. This man came here for something and the something is not the class and the something is not the form and the something is not the demonstration. The something is after. The something is now. The class is over. The students are gone. The room is 3. And I am going to sit with this man and drink tea and find out what the something is. Tea meant, bring the tea. Tea meant, this is going to take a while. Tea meant, I know what he is and I'm choosing to stay. Taky went to get the tea. The tea was in the back room. Not a room, exactly. A closet. A space behind a curtain, not a door, a curtain, a piece of fabric that hung from a rod and separated the training floor from the storage area where the extra pads were kept and the cleaning supplies were kept and the electric kettle was kept and the tea was kept. The curtain was, Taky remembered the curtain. Taky described the curtain to my father. The curtain was dark blue. Almost navy. The kind of fabric that absorbs light instead of reflecting it. So that the curtain was not a surface but a hole, a rectangular hole in the wall of the gym, a hole that led to the place where the things that the gym needed but didn't display were stored. Taky went through the curtain. Behind the curtain, Taky filled the kettle. The kettle was electric, a white plastic electric kettle, the kind with a cord that plugged into an outlet and a switch that clicked and a red light that came on when the water was heating. Taky plugged in the kettle. Clicked the switch. The red light came on. The water began to heat. Taky stood behind the curtain and waited for the water and listened to the room. The room was silent. Bruce and the man were not speaking. Taky couldn't see them. The curtain was between Taky and the room, the navy curtain that absorbed light, and Taky was in the storage closet with the pads and the cleaning supplies and the heating water, and the room was on the other side of the curtain, and the silence was coming through the curtain the way light comes through a window, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for Taky to know that the silence was not empty. The silence was full. The silence was the sound of two men sitting in a room and not speaking, and the not speaking was a conversation, and the conversation was happening at the ghost frequency, and the ghost frequency does not require words. The kettle heated. Taky prepared the tea. 3 cups. 1 for Bruce. 1 for the man. 1 for Taky. Taky's hands, the hands that held pads for Bruce Lee, the hands that absorbed the force of punches that traveled 2 inches and arrived with the weight of a man behind them. Taky's hands prepared tea. The motions were small. The motions were quiet. Tea bag in cup. Water in cup. The bag darkening the water. The steam rising. The small domestic sounds of preparation, the clink of ceramic, the pour, the settle. 3 cups on a tray. The tray was. Taky didn't describe the tray. My father didn't ask. The tray was a tray. The tray was the vehicle. The vehicle carried the cargo. The cargo was tea. Taky came through the curtain. The room had changed. Bruce was no longer in the center. Bruce was sitting on the floor, not in a chair, not on the bench that ran along the right wall, not on any of the surfaces designed for sitting. On the floor. Cross-legged. Hands in his lap. Approximately 6 feet from the man in the chair. 6 feet, half the distance of the original buffer, the 12-foot buffer that Bruce had created during class. The buffer had been cut in half. Bruce had halved the distance. 6 feet. Close enough to hand the man a cup of tea. Close enough to speak at a volume that didn't require projection. Close enough to read the man's face at the resolution that Bruce required, the micro-expression resolution, the data density resolution, the resolution that allowed Bruce to see the thing behind the thing behind the thing. Far enough to stand and move in any direction without the man being able to reach him before Bruce had already gone. 6 feet was the distance. Taky brought the tea. He set the tray on the floor between Bruce and the man. He placed 1 cup near Bruce's knee. He placed 1 cup near the man's foot, the man's right foot, which was on the floor, flat, the shoe touching the hardwood, a black leather shoe, well made. The kind of shoe that is made by a person rather than a machine, the stitching visible, the leather thick, the sole heavy. Taky placed the cup near the shoe and the man looked down at the cup, and the man's face, for the first time in 2 hours, changed. The change was small. The corners of the mouth. Not a smile, not the upward curve that the word smile describes. An easing. A softening. The muscles around the mouth releasing a tension that Taky had not realized was there until the tension released, and the absence of the tension was visible in the way that the absence of noise is audible. The man's mouth eased. The stone face was still stone. But the stone had a crack. And the crack was the tea. The man reached down. His right hand left his thigh, the first time the right hand had left the thigh since the jacket adjustment at the hour and 15 mark, and the right hand reached down and picked up the cup, and the fingers wrapped around the ceramic, and the man brought the cup to his lips and drank. He drank the way he sat, slowly, completely, without performance. Bruce picked up his cup. Bruce drank. Taky picked up the 3rd cup. Taky drank. 3 men drinking tea on a Tuesday evening in a martial arts school in Los Angeles in the early 1970s. The fluorescent buzzing. The clock ticking. The air cooling. The tea warming. Nobody spoke. For 5 minutes, nobody spoke. The tea was the language. The steam was the punctuation. The silence was the syntax. The 3 men were having a conversation in a language that does not have words, and the conversation was, "I am here. You are here. We are drinking tea. The tea is the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is enough. Bruce set down his cup. The man set down his cup. Bruce looked at the man. The man looked at Bruce. And the man spoke. The first words the man had said since entering the room. The first sound the man had made, not counting the chair, not counting the jacket adjustment, not counting the breathing that Taky couldn't hear from across the room, but that the man must have been doing because the man was alive and alive requires breathing. The first words. The man said them in Japanese. Taky heard them. Taky understood them. Taky translated them for my father, years later, in the kitchen, over tea and instant coffee, and the translation was, my father said, slow. Taky spoke the Japanese first. Then Taky paused. Then Taky gave the English. And the pause between the Japanese and the English was the pause of a man who knows that translation is loss and the loss is unavoidable and the unavoidable is painful because the Japanese said one thing and the English would say another thing and the two things would be close but not the same. The way a photograph of a face is close to the face but not the same. The way a story about a night is close to the night but not the same. The man said, in Japanese, your students have good posture. 4 words in English. More in Japanese, the structure is different, the grammar is different, the number of syllables is different, but the meaning was, your students have good posture. Not, you are a great fighter. Not, your technique is impressive. Not, I have heard of you and I came to see if the stories are true. Not any of the things that men say to Bruce Lee when they want something from Bruce Lee or want to give something to Bruce Lee or want to be near Bruce Lee. Your students have good posture. The man complimented the students. Bruce said nothing for a moment. The moment was the same moment that Bruce's body had used, 2 hours earlier, to process the man's arrival, the space between the input and the response, the processing time, the time that Bruce's mind required to take the words apart and look at them the way Taky looked at Bruce's body and the way my father looked at engine parts, from every angle, for fit, for tolerance, for the truth that lives inside the shape. Bruce said, they try. 2 words. English. Flat. The lake. The man nodded. The nod was small. The nod was the same scale as the easing of the mouth, tiny, nearly invisible, readable only by the 2 people in the room who were trained to read invisible things, Bruce and Taky. The man nodded, and the nod was not agreement and was not acknowledgement. The nod was receipt. The man had sent a signal. Bruce had returned a signal. The man's nod said, signal received. The tea cooled. The room cooled. The conversation, the one made of words, the surface conversation, the conversation that a microphone would have captured if there had been a microphone, the conversation stopped. 2 sentences. 8 words total. Your students have good posture. They try. That was the conversation. The conversation underneath, the ghost frequency conversation, the one made of tea and silence and posture and the easing of a mouth and the small nod, that conversation continued. For another 10 minutes. Nobody said another word for 10 minutes. The 3 men sat, 2 on the floor, 1 in the chair, and the 10 minutes passed the way 10 minutes pass in a room where silence is not absence but presence, where silence is doing the work that words would only interfere with. Where silence is the medium the way oil was the medium in my father's workshop, the thing between everything, the thing that makes the work possible. The man stood. The standing was slow. Deliberate. The same pace as everything the man did, not hurried, not dramatic, not the sudden rise of a man who has decided to act. The standing was the standing of a man who has decided to leave, and the decision was made some time ago, maybe minutes ago, maybe during the tea, maybe during the silence, and the body is now executing the decision at the body's own pace, which is the pace of patience, which is the pace of a man who has never been rushed and will not be rushed and cannot be rushed. The man stood. He was not tall, Taky estimated 5'6", 5'7". Shorter than Bruce. Broader. The suit hung differently when the man was standing than when the man was sitting. The fabric found different lines, different weight points, and the standing man was a different shape than the sitting man, the way a folded chair is a different shape than an open chair, and the man's shape when standing was compact, solid, rooted. A shape that said, I am not going anywhere except where I choose to go, and I am choosing to go now. The man did not bow. This is what Taky remembered. This is what Taky told my father. This is what my father told me. The man did not bow. In a room where bowing was the custom, where the class began with a bow and ended with a bow and the space between was filled with the respect that bowing represents, the man did not bow. He had not bowed when he entered. He did not bow when he left. The not bowing was not disrespect. Taky was clear about this. My father was clear that Taky was clear. The not bowing was not a statement of disrespect. The not bowing was a statement of category. Bowing is what you do in a dojo. Bowing is what students do and teachers do and visitors do. Bowing is the language of the martial arts world. The man was not in the martial arts world. The man was in his own world. The man's world had its own customs and its own language, and the man's language did not include bowing in the same way that the man's language did not include explaining why he was sitting in a chair for 2 hours. The man walked to the door. 12 feet from the chair to the door. The same 12 feet that had separated the man from the nearest student during class. The buffer. But now the buffer was behind him. The man was crossing the buffer, crossing the distance, moving through the space that Bruce had created, the space that Bruce had held, the space that had been empty for 2 hours and was now being crossed by the man for the first time. The man's shoes on the hardwood. Taky remembered the sound. Taky told my father about the sound. The sound of leather soles on hardwood, not sneakers, not bare feet, not the soft padded sound of martial arts footwear, but the hard, definite, certain sound of dress shoes on a wooden floor. Each step was a fact. Each step said, I am here. I am leaving. I was here. The man reached the door. He did not turn around. He did not look at Bruce. He did not look at Taky. He opened the door, the same door he had come through 2 hours and 15 minutes earlier, and the night air came in. Taky felt it. The night air of Los Angeles in the early 1970s, warm, dry, carrying the smell of exhaust and jasmine and the specific urban nighttime smell that is not one thing but the combination of all things that exist in a city after dark. The night air came in, and the man went out, and the door closed. The chair remained. Open. Empty. Against the wall. The gray metal folding chair that weighed 7 pounds and cost $12 and had held a man for 2 hours and was now holding nothing, and the nothing was heavier than the man. Bruce looked at the chair. Taky looked at Bruce looking at the chair. The room was two. Bruce didn't explain. The man left. The door closed. The night air settled. The chair sat open against the wall. And Bruce, still on the floor, still cross-legged, still holding the empty teacup in his right hand the way a man holds a thing he has forgotten he is holding, Bruce didn't explain. Taky didn't ask. This is important. This is the part that my father made sure I understood, the part that my father returned to more than once, the part that my father placed on the kitchen table with the same care that he placed the other parts, the chair, the breathing, the 4 signals, the buffer, the form, the T, the 8 words. My father placed this part. Taky didn't ask. Not because Taky wasn't curious. Not because Taky lacked the language or the courage or the standing. Taky Kimura had the standing. Taky Kimura was the senior student, the first student, the original student, the man who had been with Bruce since Seattle, since the beginning, since the days when Bruce was a young man teaching in a parking garage and Taky was a middle-aged man with an internment camp behind him and a grocery store ahead of him and a hole inside him that the camp had dug and the grocery store couldn't fill. Taky had the standing. Taky could have asked. Taky chose not to. Because Taky understood a principle that most people don't understand and that my father understood because my father was built from the same material that Taky was built from, patient material, quiet material, the material that waits. The principle is this: when a man does not explain, the not explaining is the answer. The silence after the event is not an absence of information. The silence is the information. The silence says, "This is mine. This is inside. This is not for you." And the not for you is not a rejection, it is a boundary, and a boundary is a gift, because a boundary tells you exactly where you stand, and a man who tells you exactly where you stand is a man who respects you enough to be precise. Bruce's silence was precise. Bruce's silence said, "The man came." The man sat. The man watched. The man drank tea. The man complimented my students. The man left. These are the facts. The facts are what I'm giving you. What lives beneath the facts, the identity, the reason, the connection, the network, the world that the man came from and returned to, that is mine. Taky received the silence. Taky held it. Taky placed it in the same place he placed everything that Bruce gave him, the techniques, the principles, the wood, the corrections, the look that Bruce gave Taky when Taky did something right, and the look was worth more than 1,000 words because the look said yes in a language that didn't require translation and didn't suffer loss. Taky received the silence and carried it for years. Years. The chair night happened. Taky didn't give my father a precise date, and my father didn't press for one, and I'm not going to pretend I have one. The chair night happened sometime in the early 1970s. Before the death. Before July 1973. Before the phone call that Taky received in Seattle that told him Bruce was gone, and the phone call broke something in Taky that never fully healed, not the way broken bones don't heal, which is a failure of the body, but the way broken bells don't ring, which is a change in the instrument that is permanent and total and turns the thing from what it was into what it will be forever. The phone call broke the bell. Taky's bell never rang the same way again. But before the bell broke, there was the chair night. And after the chair night, there was the carrying. Taky carried the chair night inside him the way he carried all of Bruce's nights, the training nights, the teaching nights, the nights when Bruce was brilliant and the nights when Bruce was frustrated and the nights when Bruce was the form in the center of the room and the nights when Bruce was the man in the car who didn't speak for 40 minutes while the engine hummed and the radio was off and the city moved past the windows and neither man said a word because the words weren't ready. Taky carried them all. And the carrying had a smell. My father told me about the smell. My father told me that when Taky talked about Bruce, when Taky placed the stories on the kitchen table, one at a time, layer by layer, over months and years of tea and coffee and silence, when Taky talked about Bruce, the kitchen changed. Not the temperature. Not the light. The smell. My father said the kitchen smelled like a gym. Not the modern gym, not the sanitized, ventilated, air-conditioned space with rubber floors and chrome machines and the smell of industrial cleaning solution that every modern gym smells like because every modern gym is cleaned by the same company with the same chemicals in the same bottles. Not that gym. The old gym. The gym of the early 1970s. The gym that smelled like sweat and leather and wood and something else, something underneath the sweat and the leather and the wood, something that my father called effort. Not the smell of effort. The smell that effort leaves behind. The residue. The ghost. When Taky talked about Bruce, the ghost of effort entered my father's kitchen. My father noticed it every time. My father told me he noticed it every time. My father told me that the smell was not in Taky, not in Taky's clothes, not on Taky's skin, not in Taky's breath. The smell was in the stories. The stories carried the smell. The stories were soaked in it the way the walls of the workshop were soaked in oil, not on the surface, not visible, not something you could wipe away with a cloth. Inside. In the material. In the thing itself. The chair night carried the smell more than most. My father noticed. My father said, when Taky told the chair night, the kitchen smelled like hardwood. Specifically hardwood. Not leather, not sweat, not effort, hardwood. The specific, dry, warm, slightly sweet smell of old hardwood floor that has been walked on and trained on and sweated on and scuffed by 1,000 feet, and the scuffs have become the wood's memory, and the memory has a smell, and the smell is what my father smelled in his kitchen while Taky placed the chair night on the table. Hardwood. The floor of Bruce's school. The floor that held the chair and the man and the buffer and the form and the tea and the silence and the 8 words and the door opening and closing and the leather shoes on the wood and the nothing that was heavier than the man. The floor came through the story. My father smelled it. My father told me. I believe my father because my father did not invent smells. My father's senses were precise. My father's senses were the same senses that measured parts to thousandths of an inch and detected the difference between a well-fitted bearing and a bearing that was off by a hair's width, not by measurement, not by instrument, but by feel. By the hand. By the skin. By the nerves that lived in my father's fingertips and reported to my father's brain with the accuracy of a micrometer. If my father said the kitchen smelled like hardwood, the kitchen smelled like hardwood. The smell was the story's signature. Every story had one, my father said. Every story that Taky placed on the kitchen table carried its own smell, its own ghost, its own residue, the olfactory fingerprint of the event that the story described. The parking garage stories smelled like gasoline and rain. The Long Beach stories smelled like canvas and chalk. The restaurant story smelled like soy sauce and someone else's cigarette smoke. The car story smelled like nothing, like the clean, conditioned, sealed air of a car with the windows up and the vents closed and 2 men inside and nowhere to go and no hurry to get there. The chair night smelled like hardwood. And something else. Underneath the hardwood. Underneath the sweat and the leather and the effort ghost and the dry warm sweetness of the wood. Underneath all of it, my father said, the chair night smelled like something he couldn't name. Something he had never smelled before. Something that did not have a word, not in English, not in any language my father spoke, not in the language of the workshop or the kitchen or the world that my father inhabited. My father tried to describe it to me. He said, you know when you open a door and there's a room behind the door and you've never been in the room and the room has been closed for a long time and the air in the room is the air of the room, not the air of the world. The room has its own air, its own atmosphere, its own composition? I said yes. He said that. The smell of a room that has been closed. The smell of enclosed air. The smell of a space that contains something that has not been released. The chair night smelled like that underneath everything else. The smell of something held. I'm telling you about the smell because the smell is the bridge. The bridge between the kitchen and the gym. Between my father and Taky. Between Taky and Bruce. Between the story and the event. The smell is the thing that crosses the chain without being changed by the chain, the thing that passes through 3 sets of hands and arrives in the 4th set, yours, still carrying the original information, still carrying the hardwood and the enclosed air and the health thing. Words change. Words are translated and summarized and paraphrased and misremembered and corrected and retranslated, and by the time the words have passed through 3 men, Taky to my father to me, the words are close but not the same. The photograph of the photograph of the photograph, the center holding and the edges soft. Smells don't change. Smells arrive whole. Smells are not translated. Smells are not summarized. The hardwood in my father's kitchen was the same hardwood in Bruce's gym, and the sameness is the thing I'm giving you, and I know you can't smell it. I know that words on a page do not carry scent. I know that the medium is wrong. I know that I am trying to transmit an olfactory experience through a visual channel, and the attempt is doomed. But the attempt is the story. The attempt is always the story. Taky attempted to give my father the chair night, and the attempt was imperfect, and the imperfection was the truth. My father attempted to give me the chair night, and the attempt was imperfect, and the imperfection was the truth. I am attempting to give you the chair night, and the attempt is imperfect, and the imperfection is the truth. The truth lives in the attempt. Not in the success. Not in the arrival. Not in the perfect transmission of the thing from one vessel to another. The truth lives in the gap between the sending and the receiving, in the space between the story and the understanding, in the distance between the hardwood floor of a gym in Los Angeles in the early 1970s and wherever you are right now, reading this, trying to smell the thing I'm trying to make you smell. You can't smell it. But you know it's there. And the knowing is enough. Bruce folded the chair. After the man left. After the door closed. After the tea cooled and the room cooled and the silence cooled and the ghost frequency faded to a hum and the hum faded to nothing and the nothing was the room returning to itself, after all of that, Bruce stood up from the floor, walked to the chair, and folded it. The folding was the reverse of the opening. The man had opened the chair in 2 sounds, the metallic whisper of the legs swinging down, the click of the seat locking. Bruce folded the chair in the same 2 sounds in reverse order, the click of the seat unlocking, the metallic whisper of the legs swinging up. The sounds were the same. The direction was different. The opening had been an arrival. The folding was a departure. Bruce folded the chair and carried it to the wall and leaned it against the other chairs, the stack of gray metal folding chairs that lived against the wall when they weren't being used, and the chair became anonymous. One gray chair among gray chairs. The chair that had held a man for 2 hours was now a chair that held nothing and would hold nothing until the next class, when a student would unfold it and sit and watch, and the sitting and watching would be normal and the chair would not remember that it had once held something other than normal. Chairs don't remember. Rooms do. Bruce leaned the chair against the wall and turned and looked at Taky, and the look was different from the looks that had come before. The scan, shoes hands face hands, had been analytical. The sustained look, the 10-second door opening, had been confrontational, not in the aggressive sense but in the literal sense, face to face, front to front, 2 surfaces meeting. The look that Bruce gave Taky now was neither analytical nor confrontational. The look was tired. Not physically. Bruce was not physically tired, the class had not taxed him, the form had not taxed him, the 2 hours of heightened presence had not taxed him in the way that running or fighting or lifting taxes the body. Bruce was not body tired. Bruce was, Taky used a Japanese word, and the word survived the chain intact because my father recognized it and kept it and gave it to me in its original form because some words should not be translated. The word was tsukurita, which means tired but doesn't mean tired. It means the tiredness that comes from carrying something, from holding something, from sustaining something that the body could sustain indefinitely but the spirit can only sustain for a while before the spirit says, enough. Not forever. Just for now. Enough. Bruce was tsukurita. And the look he gave Taky, the tired look, the tsukurita look, was the first time in the entire evening that Bruce had shown Taky anything other than control. The breathing, the shoulders, the eyes, the voice, the form, the buffer, the geometry, the center, the containment, the T, the sustained look, the flat words, all of those had been control. Masterful, precise, unbroken control. The system running at peak efficiency. The engine at redline with no vibration, no heat warning, no indication that the engine was working harder than usual. The tsukurita look was the engine light. Not the engine failing. The engine light. The small, amber indicator on the dashboard that says, I'm fine. I'll keep running. But something happened. Something required more from me than the usual operation requires. Something pushed me to a register that I can reach but don't enjoy reaching. And the reaching has a cost. And the cost is this look. This tired look. This look that I'm giving you because you are Taky and you were in the room and you held the pad and you didn't ask and the not asking was the right thing and I'm telling you it was the right thing by showing you the cost. Taky received the look. Taky held the look the way he held the pad, steady, absorbing, letting the force come and pass through him and into the ground and the ground held it. The look was a force. The look was Bruce saying, thank you for being in the room while the room was wrong. Close up, Bruce said. 2 words. Flat. But the flatness had a texture now that it hadn't had before, the texture of tsukurita, the texture of a man who has performed at a level that cost him something and the cost is audible in the words the way the cost of a hard day is audible in the voice of a man who comes home and says I'm fine and the fine has a crack in it and the crack is the truth. Bruce walked to the curtain. Through the curtain. Into the back room. Taky heard the water running, Bruce washing his hands, Bruce washing his face, the sounds of a man cleaning the night off his body the way a mechanic cleans oil off his hands at the end of a shift. Not because the oil is dirty. Because the oil is the day, and the day is over, and the hands need to be the hands of the evening now. The hands that drive home and open the front door and hold the children and touch the wife's shoulder and do the things that hands do when they are not in the gym. Bruce washed the night off his hands. Taky closed up. Taky folded the remaining chairs, the ones the students had used, the ones that were already folded but Taky checked them anyway because Taky checked everything the way my father checked parts, not because he doubted, but because checking was the discipline and the discipline was the respect and the respect was the point. Taky checked the chairs. Turned off the lights, not all of them, one bank of fluorescence stayed on, the security bank, the one that stayed on all night so that the room was never fully dark, so that the mirrors always reflected something, so that the dummy always stood in light. Taky turned off the lights and the room went from bright to dim and the dim changed everything, the hardwood went from gold to gray, the mirrors went from reflective to absorptive, the heavy bag went from visible to shadow, and the space where the man's chair had been the space against the wall. The space that had held the pressure for 2 hours, the space went from empty to absent. Empty and absent are not the same thing. Empty is a room with nothing in it. Absent is a room where something used to be and the used to be is still there, in the air, in the residue, in the smell that my father would later identify in his kitchen as hardwood and enclosed air in the smell of something held. The space was absent. Bruce came out from behind the curtain. His face was wet. His hair was pushed back. He looked, Taky said, younger. Not younger in age. Younger in weight. The tsukurita was still there, but the washing had taken something off, had removed a layer. The way removing a coat removes a layer and the body underneath is lighter and the lightness is visible. Bruce looked at Taky. He'll be back, Bruce said. 3 words. Not flat. For the first time in the evening, not flat. The 3 words had shape. The 3 words had Taky searched for the word, my father said. Taky searched for the word the way a man searches for a key in a pocket full of keys, touching each one, feeling the shape, rejecting, moving to the next. The 3 words had weight. Not heaviness. Weight. The kind of weight that an object has because of what it's made of, not because of how big it is. A small word can have enormous weight if the word is made of the right material. He'll be back. The material was certainty. Bruce knew. Bruce didn't think. Bruce didn't guess. Bruce didn't speculate or wonder or suspect or any of the words that describe the space between not knowing and knowing. Bruce knew. The man would be back. The man would return. The chair would hold the man again. The room would be wrong again. The pressure would return. The weather would return. Bruce knew this the way Bruce knew distance. The way Bruce knew the number of inches between his fist and a target. The way Bruce knew the number of milliseconds between the initiation of a movement and the completion of a movement. The way Bruce knew things that the body knows before the mind processes, and the knowing is not information, it is recognition. Bruce recognized the man. Not the man's face. Not the man's name. The man's pattern. The man had a pattern. Bruce had read it. In 5 seconds. In the scan, shoes, hands, face, hands. In the breathing. In the shoulders. In the eyes. In the 2 hours of sustained reading from the center of the room while the form played and the class trained and the tea cooled and the 8 words were exchanged. Bruce had been reading the man for 2 hours and the reading had produced a recognition, and the recognition was, this man has a pattern and the pattern includes return. He'll be back. Taky heard the words and the words entered Taky and the words sat inside Taky the way the man had sat in the chair, still, waited, present, unresolved. The words were a chair. The words held something. Who is he? Taky said. Taky asked. After 2 hours of not asking. After the silence and the principle and the boundary and the respect and the precise not explaining. After all of that. Taky asked. Not during. After. Not in front of the man. Behind the curtain, in the dim room, in the gray light of the security fluorescent, with the wet face and the pushed back hair and the tsukurita and the he'll be back. Taky asked because the he'll be back changed the equation. The he'll be back meant, this is not over. This is not a single event. This is not a man who came and sat and left and the leaving was the end. This is a man who will come again, and the coming again means that the room will be wrong again and the pressure will return and the buffer will need to be rebuilt and the center will need to be held and the engine will need to redline and the cost will need to be paid again. The he'll be back meant the future. And the future required information. Taky asked, who is he? Bruce looked at Taky. The look was, Taky told my father. And my father told me. The look was long. Long and level and steady and full of the thing that Bruce's looks were always full of, data. Bruce's eyes were data streams. Bruce's eyes transmitted information at a bandwidth that most people couldn't receive. And Taky could receive because Taky had spent a decade calibrating his receiver to Bruce's transmitter. The data that Bruce transmitted in the look was, I know who he is. I know what he is. I know where he comes from and what he represents and why he sat in that chair for 2 hours and why he complimented my students and why he drank the tea and why he left without bowing and why he'll be back. I know all of this. And I'm deciding how much to give you. The decision took 3 seconds. 3 seconds of the long, level, steady look. 3 seconds of Bruce measuring the distance between what he knew and what Taky needed to know. 3 seconds of filing, the same filing that my father did with metal, the removal of material until the part fits, the subtraction that creates the shape. Bruce subtracted. Bruce took what he knew, the full, complete, unedited knowledge of who the man was and what the man wanted and what the man represented, and Bruce subtracted. He removed the name. He removed the affiliation. He removed the history and the network and the geography and the specific, concrete, verifiable details that would have turned the man from a presence into a person, from weather into a forecast, from pressure into a number on a gauge. Bruce subtracted all of that. And what remained, the part that fit, the shape after the filing, was, he's connected. Japan. He wanted to see the school. 9 words. Taky received 9 words. Taky had asked 1 question in 3 words, who is he, and received 9 words, and the 9 words contained less information than the 3 words had requested. The 3 words had asked for a name, an identity, a who. The 9 words gave a description, a location, a what. Who and what are not the same question, and Bruce answered the question he chose to answer, not the question that was asked. Connected. Japan. He wanted to see the school. Connected, the same word Taky had used, years later, in my father's kitchen, to describe the man. And now I realize, and my father realized before me, and my father told me this, now I realize that Taky's word connected was not Taky's word. It was Bruce's word. Bruce said connected on the night of the chair, and Taky carried the word for years and placed it on my father's kitchen table, and my father picked it up and carried it and placed it on my kitchen table, and I picked it up and I'm placing it here. Connected. The word has traveled through 4 men and arrived in front of you, and the word is the same word. Not a synonym. Not a translation. Not a paraphrase. The same word. Connected. Bruce said it. Taky carried it. My father held it. I'm giving it to you. Connected. You know what it means. I know you know because you're not a child, and this is not a fairy tale. And the man in the silk suit who sat in a folding chair in a martial arts gym in Los Angeles in the early 1970s and watched Bruce Lee teach a class for 2 hours and didn't bow and didn't explain and complimented the student's posture and drank tea and left, the man was connected. To Japan. To the organization. To the structure that exists in Japan and has existed for centuries and has a name, and the name is known, and I don't need to say the name because you already know it. The man was Yakuza. I can say that. Taky didn't say it. Bruce didn't say it. My father didn't say it. The word never appeared in the chain, not once, not in Taky's kitchen visits, not in my father's telling, not anywhere. The word that appeared was connected. But connected, in the context of a Japanese man in a silk suit in the early 1970s, means what it means, and what it means is, the man was affiliated with the organized criminal structure that operates in Japan and has operations worldwide, and the operations include, but I'm not going to list the operations because the operations are not the story. The story is the chair. The story is Bruce teaching a class while a man from that world sat against the wall and watched. The story is the buffer and the form and the center and the tea and the 8 words and the folding of the chair and the he'll be back. The story is what Bruce did. Not who the man was. What Bruce did. What Bruce did with the pressure. What Bruce did with the wrongness. What Bruce did when a man walked into his room and changed the room by sitting in a chair, and Bruce responded not with force and not with fear and not with confrontation and not with submission, but with the word is Taky's, carried through my father, arriving here. Mastery. Bruce mastered the room. Not the man. Bruce didn't master the man. Bruce didn't dominate the man or intimidate the man or outperform the man. Bruce mastered the room. The room, the space, the air, the geometry, the system, the relationships between all the bodies in the room and the walls that held them and the floor that held the walls and the earth that held the floor. The room was the thing that Bruce mastered. And the mastery was the form. And the mastery was the buffer. And the mastery was the center. And the mastery was the T. And the mastery was the 8 words, your students have good posture / they try, because the 8 words were the room's language, and Bruce spoke the room's language, and the room heard him, and the room held. The room held. The way the guard held in the other story. The way the file holds its edge in my father's workshop. The way the chain holds the heavy bag to the ceiling, and the chain doesn't break because the chain is chain, and chain is what chain does. The room held. And the man left. And Bruce folded the chair. And Taky stood in the dim room and held the 9 words, connected, Japan. He wanted to see the school, and the 9 words were not enough, and the not enough was enough, because Taky understood that the not enough was the shape, the file shape, the subtracted shape, the shape that Bruce had decided to give, and the giving was the boundary, and the boundary was the gift. Taky held the gift. 4 years. My father kept the chair knight in a specific place. Not a drawer. Not a shelf. Not the workshop where the tools lived in labeled rows and the metal shavings curled on the floor like sleeping animals. My father kept the chair knight in the place where he kept everything that mattered and couldn't be touched, the place that had no address and no dimensions and no inventory sheet and no masking tape label and small pencil handwriting. My father kept the chair knight in his hands. Not metaphorically. I mean his hands. The actual, physical, calloused, oil-stained, scarred, precise hands that held files and calipers and ceramic cups with chips at the 2 o'clock position. My father's hands were his storage. My father's hands were where things lived after his mind had processed them and decided they were worth keeping. The mind was the factory. The hands were the warehouse. The things that the mind made, the understanding, the recognition, the file shape, the things went to the hands and the hands held them and the hands never forgot. My father's hands remembered Bruce through Taky. My father's hands had never touched Bruce. My father's hands had never held a pad for Bruce or shaken Bruce's hand or adjusted the collar of Bruce's jacket or done any of the things that hands do when they are in physical contact with another person. My father's hands knew Bruce the way they knew a part that someone else had machined, by the tolerance, by the finish, by the quality of the work. My father's hands held Taky's stories, and from the stories my father's hands extracted the shape of Bruce the way a jeweler extracts the shape of a stone from the matrix that holds it. Bruce's shape, in my father's hands, was precise, fast, honest, contained. 4 words. 4 facets. The stone that my father's hands extracted from Taky's stories had 4 facets, and each facet caught a different light, and each light was a different story. In the chair knight, the story of the man in the silk suit and the folding chair and the 2 hours and the 8 words, the chair knight was the facet labeled contained. Contained. Not controlled. My father was specific about the distinction, and I need to be specific here because the distinction matters, and the distinction is the thing, and the thing is what my father kept. Control is what a man does to a room. Containment is what a man does to himself. Control is external. Control says, I am in charge of this space, these people, this situation. I am directing the outcome. I am making decisions and the decisions are producing results and the results are the ones I intended. Control is the hand on the steering wheel. Containment is internal. Containment says, something is inside me, a force, a knowledge, a response, a weather, and I am holding it. I am not releasing it. I am not using it. I am not displaying it. I am holding it inside my body the way a vessel holds liquid, and the vessel does not leak because the vessel was made to hold and the holding is the vessel's purpose. Bruce, on the chair night, was a vessel. The force inside the vessel was, my father paused here. My father paused the way Taky paused. The pause was inherited. The pause had traveled through the chain, from Bruce to Taky to my father, and each man had paused before the same word, and the word was the word that lived at the center of the story the way the chair lived at the center of the room. The force inside the vessel was knowledge. Bruce knew who the man was. Bruce knew what the man represented. Bruce knew the weight of that representation, the history, the reach, the implications, the network, the danger that was not immediate but was structural, the danger that didn't need to enter the room because the danger was the room, the danger was the world that the man came from, and the world was large, and the world was organized, and the world had resources and patience and a memory that was longer than any individual life. Bruce knew all of this. And Bruce contained it. For 2 hours. While teaching a class. While correcting wrist angles. While demonstrating a form that Taky called beautiful. While drinking tea. While exchanging 8 words. While looking at the man for 10 seconds. While saying again in tea and close up and he'll be back and connected, Japan, he wanted to see the school. While doing all of this, the teaching, the demonstrating, the containing, the reading, the signaling, the geometry, the buffer, the center, while doing all of this, Bruce held the knowledge inside his body and the knowledge did not leak. The knowledge did not spill onto the students. The knowledge did not alter Bruce's voice or Bruce's posture or Bruce's teaching in any way that the students could detect. The knowledge stayed inside. The vessel held. My father recognized this. My father recognized this because my father was a vessel. My father held things. My father held knowledge of engines and tolerances and the specific weight of certain metals and the melting point of certain alloys and the sound that a well-tuned machine makes versus the sound that a poorly tuned machine makes, and the difference between the two sounds is smaller than you think, smaller than a whisper, smaller than the difference between the hum of a fluorescent light at 60 Hz and the hum of a fluorescent light at 61 Hz, and my father heard that difference. The way Taky heard the frequency of a room change when a man sat in a chair. My father held things in his hands. And my father recognized that Bruce held things in his body. And the recognition, the moment when my father understood that Bruce and my father were built from the same material, the patient material, the quiet material, the material that holds, the recognition was what my father kept. Not the story. The recognition. The story was the vehicle. The recognition was the cargo. And the cargo, the understanding that a man can hold an entire weather system inside his body without the weather escaping, without the pressure cracking the vessel, without the knowledge deforming the shape, the cargo was heavy. The cargo was the heaviest thing my father carried. Heavier than engine blocks. Heavier than the cast iron forms he lifted onto the workbench. Heavier than the toolbox he carried to job sites and the trunk of the car that smelled like oil and metal and the specific warm dust of a car that has been driven on dirt roads in summer. The cargo was heavy because the cargo was true. Not true in the factual sense, not true the way a measurement is true. Not true the way a date is true, not true the way the man arrived at 7:15 is approximately true with a margin of plus or minus 3 minutes. True in the other sense. True in the sense that a principle is true. True in the sense that wood is true, the wood underneath the furniture, the wood that holds the shape regardless of the shape, the wood that is the same whether it becomes a chair or a table or a door or a floor. Bruce was wood. Bruce was the wood underneath everything that Bruce did on the chair night, the teaching, the form, the buffer, the center, the tea, the silence. Underneath all the furniture was the wood. And the wood was containment. And containment was the principle. And the principle was true. My father held the principle. My father held the principle for years. Decades. My father held the principle while he filed metal and measured parts and drank instant coffee and rotated the cup away from the chip and listened to Taky and didn't ask and waited and filed and held. My father held the principle and the principle changed my father. Not visibly. Not dramatically. Not the way a conversion changes a man or a tragedy changes a man or a revelation changes a man, the sudden, sharp, observable transformation that other people notice and comment on and ask about. The change was slow. The change was the change of a man who holds a heavy thing for a long time and the holding strengthens the hands and the hands become different hands, not better, not worse, different hands that have held something heavy and know what holding feels like and can't unknow it. My father's hands became containment hands. My father held things differently after the chair night. Held tools differently. Held cups differently. Held the steering wheel differently. Held me differently when I was small enough to be held, when my father's arms went around me and his hands found their positions and the positions were specific and precise and the hands knew exactly where to go and the going there was not decision but memory, the muscle memory of a man who has held a principle and the principle has become the body and the body has become the holding. I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know that my father's hands were different. I didn't know that the way my father held me was informed by a story about a man in a folding chair that my father had heard from a man named Taky Kimura over tea and coffee in a kitchen that smelled like instant coffee and sometimes smelled like hardwood. I didn't know because children don't know what informs the way they are held. Children know only the holding. Children know the arms and the hands and the pressure and the warmth and the specific gravity of a father's embrace, the weight of it, the density of it, the way it says without words, you are inside and I am outside and the outside is holding the inside and the holding is the purpose and the purpose is you. I knew the holding. I didn't know the chair. Not until later. Not until my father told me. Not until my father years later, decades later, in a kitchen that was not the same kitchen but smelled the same because my father drank the same coffee from the same brand and the same kind of cup and the chip had migrated from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock but the rotation was the same, not until my father placed the chair night on the table between us and the placing was slow and the placing was careful and the placing was the same as Taky's placing because the method was inherited. The method was part of the chain. The method was one layer at a time, one visit at a time, one cup at a time. My father told me the chair night and I heard the chair night and the chair night entered me the way it had entered my father, through the hands. Through the holding. Through the understanding that containment is a form of love. Not the love that speaks. Not the love that declares and announces and performs. The love that holds. The love that says, I know what is outside. I know the pressure. I know the weather. I know the danger and the network and the reach and the patience and the memory that is longer than any individual life. I know all of this. And I am holding it. And the holding is for you. The holding is so that you don't have to hold it. The holding is so that you can train and sweat and hit pads and correct wrist angles and go home and eat dinner and sleep and wake up and come back tomorrow and the room will be right because I held the wrong. Bruce held the wrong. For his students. For Taky. For the room. Bruce held the wrong and the wrong stayed inside and the inside was a vessel and the vessel didn't leak and the not leaking was the mastery and the mastery was containment and containment was the word and the word traveled through 4 men and arrived here. Containment. My father kept it. In his hands. In the way he held things. In the way he held me. I'm keeping it now. In the way I hold this story. In the way I place it one layer at a time, one piece at a time, on the surface that exists between you and me, the surface that is not a kitchen table and is not a workshop bench and is not a hardwood floor but is a surface, and a surface is enough. I should tell you what I don't know. I don't know the man's name. Taky didn't give it. Bruce didn't give it. The chain doesn't contain it. The name was one of the things that Bruce subtracted, one of the pieces of metal that Bruce filed away before handing the shape to Taky, and the shape arrived in my father's kitchen without the name and the shape arrived in my kitchen without the name and the shape is arriving in front of you without the name. I don't know if the man came back. Bruce said he'll be back. Bruce said it with certainty. Bruce said it with the weight of knowledge. But whether the man actually returned, whether the chair was opened a second time, whether the silk suit appeared in the doorway a second time, whether the palms went down on the thighs a second time, I don't know. Taky didn't tell my father. Or Taky told my father and my father didn't tell me. Or the chain decided that the return was not load-bearing and the chain let it go. I don't know what the man wanted. Bruce said he wanted to see the school. 9 words. But wanted to see the school is an answer to what did he do and not an answer to what did he want. What he did was see the school. What he wanted, the thing underneath the seeing, the reason underneath the reason, the what underneath the furniture, what he wanted is something I cannot give you because I don't have it. Bruce had it. Bruce subtracted it. The subtraction is permanent. I don't know if Bruce was afraid. This is the thing I think about most. The thing I turn over in my hands, my father's hands, the hands that hold the thing I examine from every angle and measure with every tool and still can't determine the tolerance. Was Bruce afraid? The breathing changed. The shoulders rose 1 millimeter. The eyes went to the hands twice. The body went to readiness. The form was demonstrated. The buffer was built. The center was held. The tea was served. The silence was maintained. The he'll be back was said with certainty. The connected was said with flatness. The tsukurita look was given to Taky after the man left. Was any of that fear? I don't know. Taky didn't know. My father asked Taky, or rather, my father didn't ask Taky, my father waited for Taky to address it, and Taky addressed it on one of the later visits, one of the visits that came after the main body of the story had been placed and the layers were complete and the only thing left was the thing underneath the layers, the thing at the bottom. Taky said, I don't think Bruce was afraid. My father heard the I don't think and the I don't think was important. I don't think is not he wasn't. I don't think is an opinion. I don't think is a man who was in the room, who watched the breathing and the shoulders and the eyes and the voice and the form and the buffer and the center and the tea and the silence and the folding of the chair and the washing of the face and the tsukurita look, a man who saw all of that and processed all of that and after years of carrying and placing and examining, after all of that, the man's conclusion is, I don't think. Not, I know. I don't think. The uncertainty is the truth. The uncertainty is the truth because Bruce Lee was a human being, and human beings in the presence of men who are connected to organizations that have resources and patience and a memory longer than any individual life. Human beings in that presence feel things, and the things they feel are not always nameable and not always categorizable and not always fightable into the binary of afraid/not afraid. Bruce felt something. The breathing proves it. The shoulders prove it. The readiness proves it. The form proves it, the form that Taky called beautiful, the form that was more than right, the form that happened because the room required more from Bruce than the usual room required. Something pushed Bruce to that register. Something, the man, the pressure, the weather, the chair, something pushed, and Bruce responded, and the response was mastery, and the mastery was containment. And the containment was the vessel holding the force, and the force was something. I'm not going to name it. I'm not going to name it because Bruce didn't name it and Taky didn't name it and my father didn't name it, and the chain has decided that the thing does not have a name, and the decision is the chain's, and the chain is what I trust. The thing had no name. The thing lived in Bruce's body for 2 hours, and the thing pushed Bruce higher, and the thing was contained in the thing. After the man left, after the chair was folded, after the face was washed, the thing was still there. The tsukurita proved it. The tiredness of carrying proved it. The engine light proved it. Bruce had carried the thing for 2 hours, and the carrying had cost him, and the cost was visible in the look he gave Taky, and the cost was the proof that the thing was real. I can't name the thing, but I can tell you what it did. It made Bruce beautiful. Here is what I have. A man walked into Bruce Lee's school on a Tuesday evening in Los Angeles in the early 1970s. He sat in a folding chair for approximately 2 hours. He watched a class. He drank tea. He said 8 words. He left. Bruce taught the class. Bruce moved the students. Bruce demonstrated a form. Bruce served tea. Bruce said 12 words. Bruce folded the chair. Bruce washed his face. Bruce told Taky he'll be back. Taky stood by the far wall. Taky held a pad. Taky watched. Taky carried the story to my father's kitchen. Taky placed it on the table. 1 layer at a time. 3 visits. Maybe more. The chain doesn't specify. My father listened. My father held. My father carried the story in his hands for years. My father placed it on my table. 1 layer at a time. Many visits. The chain doesn't specify how many because the how many is not load-bearing. I listened. I held. I'm placing it here. 4 men. 4 transfers. 4 sets of hands. The story has traveled through the hands of Taky Kimura, who stood in the room. Through the hands of my father, who stood in the kitchen. Through my hands, which are placing it in front of you now. 3 sets of hands between the event and you. 3 layers of holding. 3 rounds of filing and shaping and subtracting until the shape is the shape, and the shape is what I'm giving you, and the shape is the chair. Not the man. Not the Yakuza. Not the organization. Not the danger. Not the network. Not the name that Bruce subtracted and the subtraction erased, and the erasure is permanent. The chair. The gray metal folding chair that weighed 7 pounds and cost $12 and held a man for 2 hours and was folded and leaned against the wall and became anonymous among its kind. The chair is the story because the chair is the thing that Bruce responded to. Not the man, the chair. The man was a man. The chair was a condition. The man sat down and became the chair, and the chair became the pressure, and the pressure became the weather, and the weather entered the room, and Bruce responded to the weather the way Bruce responded to everything, by mastering it, by containing it, by standing in the center and being the center and holding the center while the weather pushed and the weather pushed and the weather pushed and the center held. The center held. That is the story. 3 words. The center held. I want to tell you about the door. Not the gym door, the door that the man came through and went through, the door that opened and closed, the door that let the night in and the man out. Not that door. The other door. The door that Bruce opened when he looked at the man for 10 seconds. The sustained look. The door that was not physical and not visible and not audible but was real as the chair, as real as the floor, as real as the hands on the thighs and the palms down and the fingers slightly spread. Bruce opened a door when he looked at the man. The door said, I see you. I know what you are. I am not closing. I am not retreating. I am here, and this is my room, and you are in my room. And I am opening a door between us, not a door that you can walk through, not an invitation, not a welcome, a door. An acknowledgement that there is a space between us and the space can be opened, and the opening is my choice, and I am choosing to open it because closing it would be fear, and I am not closing it, and you can read the not closing however you want. The man read it. The man read the open door, and the man's mouth eased, and the easing was the man's response to the door, the man's way of saying, I see the door. I see that it is open. I see that the opening is a choice. And I am responding to the choice with this, the smallest possible acknowledgement. The crack in the stone. The easing of the mouth. 2 men. 1 door. 2 readings. And the door stayed open for the duration of the tea. For the duration of the 8 words. For the duration of the 10 minutes of silence. The door stayed open and both men sat in the open door, Bruce on the floor, the man in the chair, and the open door was the conversation, and the conversation was enough. Then the man left. And the door, the invisible, non-physical, real door, the door closed. Not because Bruce closed it. Not because the man closed it. The door closed because the man was gone, and a door requires 2 people, and 1 person was gone, and the door had no function without 2 people, and a thing without function ceases to exist. The door ceased. And the room was 2. And then the room was 1. Taky left. Taky went home. Taky carried the story into the night air of Los Angeles, and the night air carried Taky to his car, and his car carried Taky to wherever Taky went. When Taky left Bruce's school, which is a place I don't know, and the chain doesn't contain, and the not containing is fine. The not containing is the chain deciding that Taky's drive home is not load-bearing. The room was 1. Bruce in his school. After hours. The security fluorescent humming. The mirrors dark. The dummy standing. The heavy bag still. The chairs folded. The floor cooling. The air settling. The smell, hardwood and sweat and leather and effort, ghost and enclosed air and something held, the smell filling the room the way water fills a vessel. Bruce in the vessel. 1 man in a room that still remembered the wrong and the pressure and the weather and the chair and the man and the form and the buffer and the center and the tea and the silence and the 8 words and the door. 1 man. Standing in the center. Where he always stood. I don't know what Bruce did after Taky left. I don't know if Bruce stayed in the center. I don't know if Bruce sat down. I don't know if Bruce went home. I don't know if Bruce stood by the wall where the man's chair had been and felt the space where the pressure had lived and measured the absence the way a man measures a hole, by the shape of what's missing. I don't know. The chain ends with Taky leaving. The chain ends with the room becoming 1. The chain ends where Taky's sight ended, at the door of the gym, looking back, seeing Bruce standing in the center of the room in the dim light of the security fluorescent, and then turning, and then leaving, and then the door closing. Taky's last image of the chair night was Bruce, standing, center, dim light, alone. Taky carried that image. My father carried that image. I'm carrying that image. And the image is not a photograph and is not a painting and is not a film frame. The image is a held thing. The after-hours room where Bruce was not the teacher and not the fighter and not the performer and not the center of anyone's system. The room where Bruce was Bruce. The room where the vessel could set down the thing it was holding, and the setting down was not weakness and was not failure and was not surrender. The setting down was the end of the shift. The way a mechanic sets down the wrench. The way my father set down the file. The way anyone who holds heavy things for a living sets them down at the end of the day, and the hands are empty and the hands are tired, and the emptiness is the proof that the hands were full. Bruce's hands were empty. The tea was drunk. The chair was folded. The man was gone. The students were home. Taky was driving. The room was won. Bruce's hands were empty, and the emptiness was the end of the story, and the end of the story is the thing I'm placing on the table now, the last piece, the final layer, the bottom of the stack. Bruce, standing, center, dim light, alone, hands empty, room cooling, story ending. The chair night. My father kept it. Taky kept it. I'm keeping it. Now you. 3 weeks later, Taky came back to my father's kitchen. Not for the chair night. The chair night had been placed all 3 layers, all 3 visits, the chair and the man and the breathing and the shoulders and the form and the buffer and the tea and the 8 words and the folding and the washing and the he'll be back and the 9 words and the containment and the hands and the door. The chair night was on the table. The chair night was complete. Taky came back for something else. My father knew this because of the way Taky entered the kitchen. Every entrance has a signature, a set of micro-decisions that the body makes before the mind makes them, a sequence of movements that tells the room what kind of visit this will be. Taky's chair night entrances had been slow. Deliberate. The entrances of a man who is carrying something fragile and will not rush because rushing is breaking. Taky came through the door slowly and sat slowly and placed his hands on the table slowly, and the slowness was the signal. I have something delicate. Prepare the surface. This entrance was different. Taky came through the door at normal speed. Taky sat at normal speed. Taky placed his hands on the table at normal speed, and the normalcy was the signal. This is not delicate. This is an addition. A footnote. A piece that broke off the main body, and I found it on the floor after the main body was placed, and I'm bringing it to you because the piece belongs to the body even though the body is complete without it. My father made coffee. Taky made tea. The ritual. The cups. The steam. The surface. Taky said, he came back. 3 words. The same 3 words that Bruce had used, he'll be back, but in past tense. The future had become the past. The prediction had become the fact. Bruce had said the man would return, and the man had returned, and the return had confirmed the reading, and the reading was confirmed, and the confirmation was what Taky was placing on the table. My father held the cup. Rotated. Drank. Waited. Taky told my father that the man had returned approximately 2 weeks after the first visit. Approximately. The word did its usual work, blurring the edges, softening the certainty, creating the margin that honesty requires. Approximately 2 weeks. Maybe 11 days. Maybe 16. The number doesn't carry the weight. The return carries the weight. The man came back on another evening. Another class. Another door opening, another crossing of the hardwood, another chair unfolding. The same chair or a chair identical to the same chair, because gray metal folding chairs are identical the way snowflakes are not, which is to say, completely, without variation, without individuality, the anonymity of mass production rendering each chair interchangeable with every other chair. The man may have sat in the same chair. The man may have sat in a different chair that was the same chair. The distinction is not load-bearing. The man sat. Same position. Palms on thighs. Back straight. Same suit. Taky thought it was the same suit. But Taky qualified the thought with or one very like it, because Taky understood that men who own silk suits typically own more than one silk suit, and the suits may be identical the way the chairs are identical, and the identity versus sameness question is not load-bearing. Same man. Same chair. Same room. Same wall. Different Bruce. This is what Taky came to tell my father. This is the piece that broke off the main body. This is the footnote. The second visit was not a repetition of the first visit. The second visit was a variation. And the variation was Bruce. Bruce did not build the buffer. The students were not moved. The geometry of the room, the traffic pattern, the flow of bodies, the distribution of pairs across the hardwood, the geometry did not change. The students trained where they were training when the man arrived. 2 pairs near the mirrors. 1 pair by the heavy bag. 1 pair in the center. Nobody drifted. Nobody was redirected. Nobody was protected from the pressure because, and this is the thing, this is the piece, this is the footnote that Taky carried across the city and placed on my father's table. The pressure was different. Not less. Not more. Different. Taky described the difference to my father the way a musician describes the difference between 2 performances of the same piece. The notes are the same, the tempo is the same, the key is the same, but the thing underneath the notes, the interpretation, the intention, the breath between the phrases, the thing underneath is different, and the difference changes everything without changing anything. The man was the same. The pressure was different. The man sat in the chair in the room, which had been wrong the first time, wrong the way weather is wrong the way pressure is wrong. The room was not wrong. The room was. Taky searched. My father waited. The search took time because the word Taky was looking for was not a word that existed in the common space between Japanese and English, the overlap zone where most of Taky's bilingual life took place. The word was in neither language. The word was in the space between the languages, the untranslatable space, the space where things that have been felt but not named live in exile, waiting for a mouth that can shape them. Taky shaped it. The room was ready, Taky said. Ready. Not wrong. Ready. The room, on the second visit, was ready for the man because Bruce was ready for the man because Bruce had predicted the man, and the prediction had been correct, and the correctness meant that the man was now inside Bruce's system, not as an intruder, not as weather, not as wrong, but as a known element. A charted star. A measured distance. The man had been measured on the first visit, measured by Bruce's breathing and Bruce's shoulders and Bruce's eyes and Bruce's 2 hours of sustained reading, and the measurement was complete and the measurement was stored, and the storage meant that the man was known, and a known thing does not make the room wrong. A known thing makes the room ready. Bruce taught from his usual position. Not the center, the usual position, which was everywhere, which was the drifting, which was the movement between students that was fluid and efficient and covered exactly the distance required. Bruce did not anchor to the center. Bruce did not contain. Bruce did not build a buffer. Bruce taught. And the teaching was, Taky paused again. The second pause of the footnote visit. The second search. And the second search produced a second word that lived in the untranslatable space, and Taky shaped it. The teaching was open. Open. The opposite of contained. Not reckless, not exposed, not the open of a man who has dropped his guard and left himself vulnerable. The open of a man who has assessed the threat and determined that the threat is not a threat, and the not threat allows the guard to transform, not drop, transform from defensive to expressive. The guard becomes the art. The protection becomes the performance. The containment becomes the openness. Bruce taught open. And the openness, Taky told my father, the openness was visible to the man. Taky knew it was visible to the man because the man responded. Not with words. Not with movement. Not with any of the physical outputs that the first visit had documented, the crossed legs at the 40-minute mark, the jacket adjustment at the hour and 15 mark. On the second visit, the man didn't cross his legs. The man didn't adjust his jacket. The man's physical output was 0. But the man's face was different. The stone face, the composed, still, unreadable face that had been the same face for the entire first visit until the crack of the T, until the easing of the mouth at the end, the stone face was different from the beginning. Not cracked. Not eased. Taky didn't use those words. Taky said, his face was watching. Watching. As opposed to what? Observing? Assessing? Monitoring? Evaluating? All of those are forms of watching, and none of them are what Taky meant. Taky meant the specific kind of watching that happens when a man has decided that the thing he is watching is worth watching. Not because the thing is dangerous. Not because the thing is useful. Not because the thing can be leveraged or exploited or acquired or any of the transactional verbs that describe the watching of a man who watches for profit. The man was watching because the watching was good. The man was watching Bruce teach the way a man watches a river. Not to cross it. Not to dam it. Not to divert it or measure it or map it. To watch it. Because the river is moving and the moving is beautiful and the beauty is sufficient and the sufficiency is the reason and the reason needs no other reason. The man watched Bruce for 2 hours. 2 hours. The same duration as the first visit. The same chair. The same wall. The same clock ticking. The same fluorescent buzzing. But the 2 hours of the second visit were not the same 2 hours as the first visit because the room was ready instead of wrong and Bruce was open instead of contained and the man was watching instead of assessing, and the difference between the two visits was the difference between the first time you hear a piece of music and the second time you hear the same piece of music. The notes are the same but you are different and the difference is you. The man was different. Not the man. The man was the same. The man's watching was different. The watching had changed because the room had changed because Bruce had changed because the first visit had changed Bruce. The first visit, the chair night, the pressure night, the containment night, the beautiful form night, the first visit had taught Bruce something about the man and the something had allowed Bruce to change and the change had allowed the room to change and the room's change had allowed the man's watching to change and the man's changed watching was the result of the first visit and the first visit was the cause and the result were connected the way all causes and results are. Connected, invisibly, inevitably, across the distances that separate events. At the end of the class, the students left. The room became 3. Bruce sat on the floor. Same position as the first visit, cross-legged, 6 feet from the man. Taky brought the tea. 3 cups. The tray. The curtain. The kettle. The ritual. The same. But this time, when the tea was poured and the cups were distributed and the 3 men held the warm ceramic in their hands and the steam rose and the silence began, this time, the man spoke first. The man spoke first. On the first visit, the silence had lasted 10 minutes before the man spoke. On the second visit, the silence lasted, Taky estimated, 30 seconds. Half a minute. The man picked up the cup, drank, set the cup on his thigh, not on the floor, on his thigh, balancing the cup on the flat surface of his leg. The way a man balances a cup when the cup is not the point and the setting down is not the point and the point is what comes after the setting down, and the man spoke. In Japanese. Taky heard. Taky translated. Taky carried. My father received. The man said, "You move differently when you're not thinking about me." 11 words. English count. More in Japanese. The words were, my father told me, the words were a shock. Not to Taky. To my father. My father heard the words in his kitchen and the words shocked him because the words revealed something that the first visit had not revealed, and the something was, the man was paying attention. Not the surface attention that any person pays to anything they are watching. The deep attention. The attention that Bruce paid to the room. The attention that Taky paid to Bruce. The kind of attention that reads the difference between the first visit and the second visit, between the contained Bruce and the open Bruce, between the buffered room and the ready room, the kind of attention that registers a shift in a man's movement quality across 2 visits separated by 2 weeks and names the shift accurately. You move differently when you're not thinking about me. The man had seen the first visit and seen the containment and seen the buffer and seen the center and seen the form and seen all of it, and the man had understood. The man had understood that all of it, the geometry, the mastery, the containment, the beautiful form, all of it was because of him. All of it was Bruce responding to his presence. All of it was the pressure making the precision. And now, on the second visit, the pressure was gone, not gone, transformed, and the precision was different, not less, different, and the man had seen the difference and named it in 11 words. The man was a reader. The man read bodies the way Bruce read bodies. The man read rooms the way Taky read rooms. The man was not, and I need to say this, I need to place this on the table because it changes the shape of the story. The man was not a civilian. The man was not a businessman in a silk suit who happened to be connected. The man was a practitioner. Not of martial arts. Of attention. Of the discipline of watching. Of the art, and it is an art, of sitting in a room and seeing everything and saying nothing until the saying is precise, and the precision is a gift, and the gift is 11 words. You move differently when you're not thinking about me. Bruce heard the 11 words. And Bruce, Taky told my father, Bruce smiled. Not the performance smile. Not the camera smile. Not the smile that Bruce used in interviews and demonstrations in the public spaces where Bruce's smile was a tool and the tool was charm and the charm was a lever and the lever moved the world. Not that smile. The private smile. Taky had seen the private smile before. Not often. The private smile was rare. The private smile happened when Bruce was surprised, not startled, not shocked, not the involuntary response to an unexpected stimulus. Surprised. The surprise of recognition. The surprise that a man feels when another man sees him, not looks at him, sees him, and the seeing is accurate and the accuracy is a gift and the gift is unexpected because accurate seeing is rare and rare things surprise. The man had seen Bruce. The man had seen that Bruce, on the first visit, was performing not dishonestly, not falsely, but performing in the sense that every man performs when he is being watched by an unknown force. The containment was a performance. The buffer was a performance. The form was a performance. Not fake. Not insincere. But shaped by the watching. Shaped by the pressure. Shaped by the man. And the man had seen, on the second visit, that Bruce was not performing. That Bruce, freed from the pressure of the unknown, the man was now known, the man was now charted, the man was now inside the system, that Bruce, freed, moved differently. And the different movement was the real movement. And the man preferred the real movement. And the man said so. Bruce smiled. The private smile. And the private smile was, Taky told my father, the private smile was the most Bruce thing that Taky had ever seen. More Bruce than the form. More Bruce than the containment. More Bruce than the 4,000 movements. More Bruce than the 1-inch punch. More Bruce than any of the things that Bruce was famous for and would become more famous for and would be remembered for long after the phone call came and the bell broke. The private smile was Bruce at his most Bruce. Because the private smile was the door, the invisible. Non-physical, real door, the door opening again. But this time the door was not opening outward, toward the man. The door was opening inward. The man's 11 words had found the door and the man's 11 words had opened the door from the outside, not forced it, not pushed it, not broken it, opened it the way a key opens a lock, by fitting. By being the right shape. By being precise. The man's words were precise. The man's words fit Bruce's lock. And Bruce smiled. And Taky, standing by the far wall, holding no pad this time, just standing, just watching, just being Taky. Taky saw the smile and the smile entered Taky the way the breathing had entered Taky on the first visit, and the smile was the signal and the signal said, "This man sees me." This man, in the silk suit, with the hands on the thighs, from the world he comes from, this man sees me. And the seeing is enough. And the enough is the smile. And the smile is the door. And the door is open. Bruce said, and this is the last thing Bruce said on the second visit, the last words that the chain carries from the second evening. I know. 2 words. You move differently when you're not thinking about me. I know. 13 words total. The 2 visit total. The first visit, 8 words. The second visit, 13 words. 21 words across 4 hours of shared space. 21 words. The rest was silence and tea and watching and the ghost frequency and the door and the chair and the room. 21 words. And the 21 words were enough. And the enough was the story. And the story was the chair. My father died with the chair knight in his hands. Not literally. My father did not die holding a folding chair or a teacup or a piece of paper with the story written on it. My father died in the way that men like my father die, quietly, without performance, without the drama that movies give to death, because movies need drama and death doesn't need anything. My father died and his hands were empty, and the emptiness was the same emptiness that Bruce's hands had on the chair night after the man left and the chair was folded and the room was one. But the hands were not empty. The hands were full of held things. The hands were full of decades of holding, the tools, the parts, the tolerances, the cup with the chip, the steering wheel, me, Taky's stories, the chair night, the containment, the principle, the wood. The hands were full the way a vessel is full when the vessel has been holding for so long that the holding has become the vessel and the vessel has become the holding, and the two are the same and the sameness is the life. My father's hands were his life. And the chair knight was in his hands. And the chair knight is now in my hands. And I've been placing it, this whole time, from the first word to this word, I've been placing it on the surface between us, and the surface is holding, and the surface will hold because surfaces hold. That's what surfaces do, the way floors hold and tables hold and hands hold and stories hold. I want to tell you what stayed. Not what happened, I've told you what happened. The man. The chair. The class. The form. The buffer. The tea. The words. The door. The smile. The return. The I know. What stayed? What stayed is the thing that lives after the events stop. The residue. The ghost. The smell that my father smelled in his kitchen, the hardwood and the enclosed air and the health thing. What stayed is the thing that doesn't leave when the story ends. Here is what stayed. Bruce Lee stood in the center of a room while a man from another world sat against the wall, and Bruce did not flinch and did not posture and did not retreat and did not advance and did not explain and did not apologize and did not perform any of the things that men perform when they are in the presence of power that they do not control. Bruce was in the presence of power he did not control. And Bruce responded with the only power he did control, himself. Himself. His body. His breathing. His shoulders. His eyes. His voice. His movement. His form. His teaching. His tea. His silence. His words. His back. His spine. His center. His containment. His openness. His private smile. His I know. Bruce responded with Bruce. And the response was enough. This is what stayed. This is the residue that the chair knight left on every surface it touched, on Taky's memory, on my father's hands, on my hands, on this surface, on you. The residue is, a man is enough. Not a system. Not a school. Not a style. Not a lineage. Not a network. Not an organization. Not money. Not connections. Not the resources and patience and memory that are longer than any individual life. A man. Standing in the center of his room. Being himself. Is enough. Bruce was enough. On the chair knight. On the second visit. In the form. In the tea. In the silence. In the 21 words. In the private smile. In the I know. Bruce was enough, and the being enough is the thing that stayed, and the thing that stays is the thing I'm giving you, and the thing I'm giving you is the chair. I'm sitting at a table. Not my father's table. My table. My kitchen. My coffee, not Folgers, not instant, something different, something that my father would have tasted and set down and gone back to the Folgers, because the Folgers was the coffee and the coffee was the Folgers, and a man who has found his coffee does not need another coffee. I'm sitting at my table and I'm holding my cup, and my cup doesn't have a chip, but I rotate it anyway. The rotation is inherited. The rotation is the chain from my father's hands to my hands, from his cup to my cup, from his kitchen to my kitchen, the gesture traveling through time the way the word connected traveled through men, arriving here, intact, performing its function even though the function, avoiding a chip that doesn't exist, is unnecessary. I rotate the cup because my father rotated the cup. My father rotated the cup because the cup had a chip. The chip is gone. The rotation stays. This is how stories work. The event ends. The gesture continues. The man leaves. The chair stays. The school closes. The floor stays. The body dies. The hands stay, not the physical hands, not the flesh and bone and callus and scar, but the holding. The holding stays. The holding is the thing that outlasts everything that dies. Taky is gone. Taky Kimura died in 2021. 96 years old. A life that started before the war and survived the camp and found Bruce in a parking garage in Seattle and held a pad while Bruce punched holes in the distance between possible and impossible. A life that carried the chair knife for 50 years and placed it on a kitchen table, and the placing was slow and the placing was careful and the placing was love. Taky is gone. The placing stays. My father is gone. My father died and his hands were full, and the fullness was the life and the life was the holding and the holding was the chain. Taky to into me, and the chain held because chain is chain and holding is holding, and the function doesn't stop when the vessel breaks. My father is gone. The holding stays. Bruce is gone. Bruce died on July 20th, 1973. 32 years old. A life that started in San Francisco and burned through Hong Kong and Seattle and Oakland and Los Angeles and Hong Kong again, and ended in a room that was not his school and was not his center and was not the hardwood floor where the chair stood and the form played and the man watched and the tea cooled and the 21 words were enough. Bruce is gone. The center stays. The center stays because the center is not a place. The center is not the geometric middle of a hardwood floor in a gym on College Street in Los Angeles. The center is a principle. The center is a man standing in the middle of whatever room he is in, regardless of the pressure, regardless of the weather, regardless of who sits against the wall and what they represent and how long their memory is. The center is being enough. The center is Bruce. I'm placing the cup on the table. I'm lifting my hands off the cup and setting my hands on the table, palms down, fingers slightly spread, the way the man sat in the chair, the way my father sat in his kitchen, the way Taky sat across from my father, the way Bruce sat on the floor 6 feet from a man he didn't know and served tea to a man he didn't trust and smiled at a man who saw him. Palms down. Fingers spread. The position of receiving and the position of giving and the position of holding and the position of letting go. I'm letting go of the chair knight. Not releasing it. Not discarding it. Not the letting go of a man who doesn't want the thing anymore. The letting go of a man who has carried the thing to the place where it belongs, and the place is here and the here is you and the you is whoever you are, wherever you are, reading this, sitting in whatever chair you're sitting in. Your chair. Your room. Your center. The chair knight is yours now. The story has passed through its hands, Taky's hands, my father's hands, my hands, and the story is arriving in your hands, and your hands are the fourth set, and the fourth set is the final set, because I don't know where your hands will carry it, and I don't need to know, because the chain has done its work and the work is done, and the work was transmission. Getting the thing from there to here. From then to now. From the hardwood floor of a gym in Los Angeles in the early 1970s to whatever surface is in front of you right now. The surface is enough. Your hands are enough. You are enough. He folded the chair.